Thank you so much for being here. We're going to give everybody just a few moments just to get in and get settled, and we'll get started in just a second. Alrighty, so we're going to get started, and we will have our wonderful director go ahead and introduce herself, and then we will keep moving with our agenda for today.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Thursday. We are so happy to have you all here and with us for our Generation 30 Applicant Information Session. My name is Christy Sadri. I'm the Division Director for Charter Authorizing, and it is so nice to meet you all. Thank you for joining us. And I am here with my amazing team, Brittany, Sarah, and John, who are going to be taking you through this process. You may have already been in touch with them. They are wonderful, and they will guide you and make sure that you have all of the information that you need as you go through this process. Today is full of lots of information, so please feel free to take notes and ask questions. And Brittany will talk a little bit more about how you can get your questions answered in Zoom. But we are really excited to have you here, and please let us know if there's anything that we can do for you. And I'll turn it over to Brittany.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christy. So before we get started, I'm going to let my team introduce themselves. I'm Brittany Glenn. I am the new schools manager. I'm very excited to be here. Hopefully you have a nice comfy seat and you're able to take some good notes. If you are a coffee drinker like I am, hopefully your coffee is brewed and ready to go. And we can really get down to some great information for you today. So John?
Morning, everybody. I see the attendance still rising. So I'm John Garland. I've been working with charter school applicants since about 2014, 2015. So been doing this a while. I say that because I'm excited, especially this morning, because I see some familiar faces that I have not seen, or seen some familiar names rather, that I have not seen in a long time. So it's good to have everyone here, and especially those who decided to re-engage in our process. So with that said, I'll kick it over to Sarah.
Good morning, y'all. Thank you so much, first of all, for being here to get this information today. My name is Sarah Khan. I am a new school specialist, and I joined the agency around a year ago. However, I spent the entirety of my career working with charter schools, starting with a teacher all the way moving up. And I'm just excited to work with you all and see this process through with you.
Awesome. Thanks, team. So you have some wonderful people who are going to join you throughout the day, and we'll get to that when we talk about the schedule. But I wanted to make sure you knew who my team was, so you can be able to put a face with an email, since some people think we live in this computer. So we also think that between each other because we don't see each other every single day in person. Alrighty, so we're gonna do some grounding knowledge, go through the agenda, talk through some charter history, and then we'll get into the application process. So before we get started, we'll do a charter portfolio overview. You have already met our wonderful team. So there are our names. You also should see them in our little Zoom boxes, but that way you know who we are and you can put our smiling faces with our name. So the agenda for today. So Christy, she has been our newly onboarded Director of Charter School Authorizing. She comes with a wealth of knowledge, and our team is just super stoked to have her and be able to dig in her data bank of resources and continue to push our team forward. So thank you, Christy, for joining us this morning. I know you have a very busy calendar, so thank you for just taking time to come and meet all of our new prospective charter applicants. And so thank you again for being here. So I will give you a little bit of a charter portfolio kind of walkthrough, giving you some historical knowledge from where we came from to where we are today, kind of just breaking down some information for you, so you can see kind of where we ground ourselves. And then my team and I will discuss the application and give you a really high level of like, when's the timeline, and a big thing about when it's due. That's a big thing that people want to know, walking you through the steps in which how you turn that in. All of those things will go into that application overview. Throughout the presentation, we do ask that you use the question and answer feature. That's where your questions will be submitted. We will take a look and be able to either type you an answer back and or answer it verbally. So we'll have quite a few question and answer sections kind of built in. Bridget will come in and give you some charter school law knowledge. We will have some people join us and go over the financial plan workbook. That is a pretty hefty piece of the application. So we'll have John, Peja, and Dina give you some information on what that looks like and what has been updated if this is not your first time doing this. So you'll see that soon. Then we'll take a little break to answer some more questions. We'll have some lunch, my favorite part of the day, and then we will move into our second half of the day, so our afternoon sessions. In those sessions, we'll be joined by Nathaniel, who's going to cover all things CSP, what's allowable, what's not allowable, how you apply for it, all of those things that you guys will want to know about the CSP. Scarlett will be joining us to give us a special education overview, and then Dr. Rocha will then join to give us an emergent bilingual overview. So lots of great things are going to come your way today. It is going to seem like a lot of information. We do urge you to stay with us all the way to the end. We don't want you to miss any of the sections in which we're going to give you something really magical. And then, of course, please submit your questions so we can answer those. Before I get too deep into going over our charter portfolio overview, I want to also name that this is for our Generation 30 Sub D and E application session. So if you are on the track of Sub G with our adult ed, if you are trying to then turn around and have a high performing entities application, this is not the session for you. So we may see some of our participants kind of drop off, which is okay, but we don't want to waste your time. We want to make sure you're in the right place, getting the right information. So this is our Sub D Generation 30 application information session. Okay, all right. So let's take a look at some data, kind of ground us where we are. So open enrollment, charter schools in Texas. So our legislative history is up on the screen for you. You can see that this is kind of all culminated in 1995. This is where like the 74th legislature passes the Texas charter law. And we've kind of moved in this trajectory towards a lot of different things. So 2001, universities and four-year colleges. may establish charter schools all the way up into 2013, having that mandated default closure law. So things have been kind of added as we have moved through our timeline, and where SBOE first was awarding the charter schools and now moving over to the commissioner, kind of awarding and granting those charter schools. So here at TEA, we love some acronyms. So I want to make sure that you have some knowledge. You're going to hear some acronyms kind of throughout the day. The first one is open enrollment. And I want you to understand that an open enrollment charter, or what open enrollment means, is that a school is open to all students on a first come, first served basis, regardless of the school model. Okay, that's kind of grounding you where you need to be. So schools may consider whether a student has a documented history of criminal offenses, according to subchapter A, chapter 37. And then a school specializing in student performing arts may consider whether the student has those artistic abilities for application. We're now moving into what is an LEA. In Texas, we authorize LEAs, which are local education agencies. So these charter schools are their own LEA. So you are applying for that, right? Which means that you have a governing board that is legally responsible for administration, performance, and governance. And no entity may be able to hold multiple charter LEAs. So that's the important note. That's why it's red. So the purpose that our team feels of Texas charter schools, and what we always want to move towards, is improving student learning, increase choice opportunities in the public school system, create professional opportunities to attract new teachers, establish a new form of accountability, and encourage different and innovative learning models. Ultimately, we want to make sure that those are the things that we are all moving towards, that your application speaks towards, and we're all grounded in those purposes of why charter schools exist here in Texas. So a little background knowledge on charter enrollment. So current number of charter LEAs is 186. We have about 916 charter campuses, which it results in quite a bit of students being served in a charter school setting. So we're continuously adding to that number. And then our goal next year is to, of course, add some more to our charter school LEAs. So a little background on like where we are as far as operator size. Currently, we do have 14 large charter operators, which are 10 or plus campuses. And those are 471 current campuses. We do have 21 medium operators, which are 6 to 9 campuses. And there is a resulting of 145 campuses total. We have 78 small operators with 227 campuses, and those are 2 to 5 campuses in that small operator, and then 73 standalone operators, resulting in the 73 campuses. So what's good to know about this is a majority of charter schools manage less than 6 campuses. Our student demographics are listed out here on the screen for you. You can kind of decide what your eye would like to focus on. But a really important note here is charter school enrolls 2% more Black and 5% more Hispanic students than traditional schools. Now that we have looked at the student demographics, we can talk a little bit about the staffing demographics. So you can see on one side, there are staff ethnicities. On the other, kind of breaks down experience and degrees. Charter schools employ a higher percentage of non-white teachers than traditional districts. So since 2013, 13.4% of charter applicants have been approved. And this has resulted in 338 new charter applications, turning into 47 approved charters. So our contact information is going to be listed out here on the screen. The email at the top, it goes to myself, Sarah, and John. So if you want to get us all in one swipe, it goes to all of us, but our individual emails are listed below. If you have questions, even after this presentation, there is a line on different things that we're able to talk to you about. But if they're rooted in something technical and you're like, I just can't download this, we can help with that. But we really have to steer clear now that the application is launched from answering any context questions. So team, before we keep going, I would like to see if there's any questions in the chat.
None at the moment.
Perfect. Sounds wonderful. Anything else you guys would like to add before we move on to our application overview?
Just one quick name. I know I've answered some questions in the chat, but I'm making sure that everyone's aware that this presentation and all the presentations following today will be linked on our charter application page. So you can go back and check that as well as the recording.
Perfect. And John, I saw you come off of mute. Did you need to add something?
If anyone has a concern that your attendance was not accounted for, a pretty beneficial feature to Zoom is that it automatically counts you all. And so we're able to then download that report and verify. So, but if you all have any doubts, feel free to email the inbox email address that you see on your screen, and we will certainly try and validate and confirm that for you.
And then one last thing, I do see a couple of people trying to raise their hands. Unfortunately, we can't have you come off of mute. Please make sure you're asking any of your questions in that Q&A box, and we'll definitely make sure that we're getting to those questions.
Perfect. Thanks, team. All right, so let's move into our application overview, what everybody came here for. All right, so we're going to break down the application. This is probably where most of the questions are going to start flying in. So we will take some time. If there's like an applicable question to like where we are, we may or may not just hop on and just answer it. If not, we'll get to it right at the end. So just keep flooding the question and answer feature if you see something, and we definitely will get to you. All right, so kind of moving through and talking about the timeline overview. So application launched in September. We have our 2 information sessions. We had one last week and this week. So hopefully you've come to one of those. The drafting period for applicants is September to December. Your application submission deadline is December 20th at 5 p.m. You're going to hear 5 p.m. quite a bit throughout this presentation. That is a very hard deadline that we do have. So we really urge you guys to practice with your submission and like, okay, what do I need to download and what do I need to upload? So that way, right before 5 p.m., you're in and you're ready to go. So we will move into the completion and review process as a team in December through April. Capacity interviews will be scheduled out between May 7th through the 16th. Our COE proposal will be in May 28th. And then SBOE deliberation, where you guys will be there in person, will be June of 2025. All right, so with that being said, let's take a look from like 10,000 feet and kind of discuss some big picture questions that we hope to address for you today, starting with the most basic question of are we eligible to apply to what is the application? And even discussing what happens after you submit the application. Our hope is that you walk away today with a really good understanding of where you currently stand in our process, the necessary commitments that are going to be required of this process, and the expectation that determines how far you may advance in the process. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about our next slide. So under sub-chapter D, there are 3 eligible entities that can apply for an open enrollment charter. Those are a tax-exempt organization under Section 501c3, government entity defined by state law, and or institute of higher ed, such as a public, private, or independent institution as defined by Texas Education Code. So under subchapter E, this is limited to public colleges and universities as defined by Texas Education Code. And historically, what we have seen is that most applicants fall under one of those categories and then they apply to become an open enrollment charter. But we will take a look at how you and what you should do if you need to establish that tax exempt status. So there are 3 available applications. There's our new operator, experienced operator, and our subchapter E, which is the college and university. For our new operator, the eligible entity that has not operated a charter before and is seeking a state authorized charter under TEC Chapter 12, Subchapter D. For the experienced operator, the eligible entity is or can be affiliated with an out-of-state charter management organization system with multiple years of experience data. It also can be somebody who operates a district authorized charter campus in Texas and or is incorporated in the state of Texas, but operates or manages at least one charter school or campus with that multiple years of performance data. For subchapter E, the eligible entities include public junior college, public senior college, and public universities. So please note that Generation 30 offers a separate and streamlined experience operator application. And so you just need to make sure you know which one you fall under, so you're able to fill out that application and apply correctly. So we're going to move to Sarah to talk about accessing those available applications.
Thank you, Brittany. Yes, so this is probably one of the most important questions that we receive is how do we actually access the application documents? So we're going to go ahead on the next slide and watch a quick little video that will show you how to access the documents. And then throughout this presentation, we'll continue to reinforce how you can access our application documents for Generation 30.
Okay, so right now I'm going to walk you through how you can access all of the application materials. This first page right here is the charter schools page. If you scroll down, you will see the news and events. It will name that the Generation 30 application cycle is open. You will also find the link to the charter school applicants page. This is where all of the documents for the application are actually housed. So if you're here and you're like, I can't find all of the documents, you need to go to the charter applicant page. You can click this link and it will take you directly to it. Or you can also click this applicant link right here and it will also take you to it. Once you get to the charter school applicants page, you will see the headline subchapter D open enrollment charters. This is going to house all of the information for your subchapter D applications. You have your application documents right here, your instruction and guidance, your new operator narrative document, and your experienced operator narrative document. Additionally, this will also house all of the documents for the high performing entity, local, and also out of state. All of these webinars are applicable for both subchapter D and subchapter E, so make sure that you're registering for yourself for whichever one you need. Please note that we will also have an optional applicant information session tomorrow for our high performing entity application. What I want to walk you through is how you open your new operator narrative document or your experienced operator narrative document. What you'll notice is once you click on it, it's going to download in your browser. I will flag that if you try to open it from this download, it says the documents you are trying to load require Adobe Reader 8 or higher, so it looks like you can't actually access it. This is because you're not able to access it from the web. Instead, when you click on it and it downloads, you should go to your local file browser and it should look something like this. And you'll note, you'll see the Gen 30 sub D new operator application, and you'll click on it from there. If you try to open it from the web, it will not open. And this is what it should look like. Again, I just want to note, if you try to open it from the web, it will not open. That will also happen for subchapter E. If you try to open this document through the web, downloads, it will not open. So you'll just need to open it through your local drive.
Perfect. So if you need to have a refresher reminder that we are going to be posting these and you can go access that video to make sure that you're able to access the documents correctly. So now that you know how to access the documents, we want to talk about the parts of the application package. There are 5 key components to our application package, and each part is really essential for you to be able to submit a successful application. So I'm going to walk you through each part of them. The first document you're going to see is the instructions and guidance document. This document provides you all of your eligibility criteria, your timelines, your key dates, and it also walks you through your submissions instructions. It's important that you read this very closely to make sure that you are doing what you need to do in order to successfully submit your application. Additionally, I'll name that this document also contains all of the criteria for the narrative questions to make sure that you are able to review if you've completed your application to fidelity. The next document is your narrative document. This is a fillable PDF and it includes your executive summary, your application checklist, and all of your narrative response questions. This is where you're actually going to type all of your responses for any of the questions that we are asking you in this application. The next document or part of the package is the attachment cover sheets and forms. In this, it will provide all of the directions for submitting each attachment. You can access your attachments through the application checklist in the application. It will hyperlink all of the attachments for you to be able to complete. Additionally, you'll find the 4th component, the financial plan workbook. This is an Excel document that supplements your budget narrative, and it allows you to type directly into that Excel. The last one is for our high-performing entity. Are required for experienced operators only. Apologies. Again, this is required for experienced operators only. You will use this workbook to showcase your existing schools and their performance. This is the portfolio overview workbook. And again, this is for experienced operators only. So now that you know the different components of the application package, we're going to talk specifically about the narrative document. Let's start with how you access the narrative document. Just like I showed you in the video, first you're going to download it to your local drive and you're going to save it to your desktop or a specific folder. It's important that you open the file directly from that saved location and not from the browser's download box. Otherwise, you're going to receive an error and it's going to look like you can't access it. Again, please make sure you're downloading it and opening it from that saved portion. The narrative document, like I mentioned, is a fillable PDF, and you're going to type your responses directly into this. And make sure you're saving as you go. This will ensure consistency across applications. The response boxes and tables are expandable and automatically will adjust as you add more content. When you are going through your narrative response, you can go back to your instruction and guidance document and a reminder that it does house all of the evaluation criteria for each of the narrative questions so that you'll be able to review those prior to submitting. The next thing we're going to talk about is going to be your attachment document.
Hey, Sarah, really quick before we go there, I just wanted to address a question. It's probably the best place to answer it. It's just about saving the document. We would probably address this in a support seminar, but we can say it now as well. You can actively save in the narrative document. It does not auto-save because it's a fillable PDF, but we do highly encourage you all to please save often, save backups of your work as well. We don't want you losing that. And yeah, just be sure to use best practices as you would tell anyone else to be ensure that you don't lose the work you've been so diligently working on during the application drafting process. Sorry, Sarah.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for addressing that question. Perfect. Now we'll go ahead and talk about the attachment documents. All of the attachments are hyperlinked in your narrative attachment check link. When you click on that, it will open up the actual attachment, and the attachment will provide all of the specific instructions that are needed in order to complete the attachment. Additionally, there are some attachments that are a fillable PDF form. So you can type directly into those fillable PDF forms and then make sure that you're saving that as well. And then finally, there are those worksheets. So you'll have the financial plan workbook, and for those experienced operators, the portfolio workbook. Those will come as Excel workbooks. And when you're completing those, they need to remain Excel workbooks. And when you submit your application, they also should remain an Excel workbook. So these are the attachments. When you look at the attachment checklist, you'll be able to see them all hyperlinked. And then you'll be able to work through those. I'll go ahead and pause right here just in case we have any additional questions. I see that we have somebody who raised their hand. Unfortunately, we're unable to have you come off of mute. Go ahead, if you can type your question in the Q&A, then we'll go ahead and respond to that.
And Sarah, as of right now, you don't have any questions.
Beautiful. Well, if I don't have any questions, then I'm going to pass it off to John, and he's going to start discussing drafting the application.
Thank you, Sarah. Sorry, you all. There we go. Before we talk about drafting the application, I just want to return to something Brittany talked about regarding eligibility and those who will be pursuing their federal tax exempt status to facilitate the eligibility requirement. Just a couple side notes on that. So you do not have to start a new 501c3 tax exempt status. If you have one that is current, you can use that one, barring some exceptions and what that might look like. But more importantly, for those who will be establishing a new tax exempt status, we just highly encourage you all to get those eligibility documents filed ASAP, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next couple slides. But before I forget, just want you all to know, please make note, get that in ASAP, because the slow or not slow processing time of the IRS would not be a valid excuse should you not have the documents on time to us. So, okay, let's talk a bit about drafting the application. And as Brittany said, we just kind of want to anchor these in some very high level questions, one of which is how many applications are you actually going to have to complete? Are you limited by who you can enroll? Are there notification requirements that you are applying? Are there community engagement requirements? Talk a little bit about instructional materials. And then lastly, I'll finish my time with you all just briefly discussing communications and what that's going to look like during the drafting period. Going back to what Brittany said and anchoring ourselves in the timeline, again, you have from now, basically September to December, to draft your entire proposal, get all of those attachments finished and ready for submission. All right, so kind of going to how many applications, kind of want to talk a bit about schools, campuses, and expansions, what's the difference, and why does that really impact you at the moment? So as Brittany said, we are, as authorizers of subchapter D, E, G, we are authorizing open enrollment LEAs. So we are authorizing charter schools. Okay, so as an applicant, you can only apply one application, and you're applying for a school. Under that school or LEA, you can propose one or more campuses. So just to say that one more time, as you apply, keep in mind, you're giving us one application to open up a LEA, a local education agency, and under that, you will tell us in the application how many campuses you would like to open during the first initial contract period if you are awarded. Okay, I'll get to what that initial contract period is in a minute. Okay, so then moving beyond that, the operational phase. So the governing board, so again, if you are a federal tax exempt 501c3 holder, you are a nonprofit, you will have a board, right? That board that you will designate in your application, as well as the state of Texas, has to have at least 3 members. Bridget in her next presentation will discuss that. But that board, they become the school board should you get awarded. So to clarify that, if there are 6 or 7 board members on your nonprofit, then if you're awarded charter school, they do not delegate those duties to someone else. At that point, they in effect become the charter school board. They govern the district. So each campus, if you submit an application and you say we want 4 campuses, each campus still rolls up to the LEA level of which the board is governing. All right. So just again, so we're clear on terms and how it's going to work. Also want to note real quick about the board. We do get this question a lot, so I'm going to just answer it now. And if you have questions about it, please feel free to ask me or Bridget in her presentation. Many times applicants, they dream of this. It is one person's baby. They want to see it to fruition. Once a charter opens, they obviously want to get compensated, for that hard work by being a paid employee of the school. You are prohibited, barring a couple exceptions, you are prohibited, especially in this regard, from being the superintendent as well as being on the board. So this is your idea. Before you submit this application, you need to make a decision. You need to make a decision. Are you going to be on the board where you will have policy input and governance input, or are you going to be a paid employee of the school? You cannot be both. All right. So I know that sounds odd to some, but that's the world we live in. And so you just kind of need to make a decision. Also on that note, board members can make plans to step down and become paid employees of the school. When you fill out your biographical affidavit as a board member, you will have to note that. But again, there's nothing wrong with someone being on the board at the time of application submission with plans to step down from the board if there's a if the charter is awarded to become a paid employee. So there's nothing wrong with that. We just have to note it and know that that is part of your plan. Okay. Now, that said, also in your application, you have to designate a few things that you're going to be held to in the contract should you get one. That's the number of campuses you want, which I've been talking about. You'll also specify grade levels and maximum enrollment. Okay, so maximum enrollment, as it's defined by us in the application, is how many students are you asking for at maximum during your first 5 years that you plan to enroll. So if you say 300 is our maximum enrollment, that means, and you are telling us that you want to be authorized for 300 students, no more than that. So 302 students, 2 of those students will not be eligible to enroll and not be eligible for funding. So I just want that, again, very clear. Maximum enrollment doesn't mean what you hit in year 1. It just means at any point in that 5-year window, the highest enrollment that you're asking to seek, okay? Now let's talk about the contract for a quick second. TEA offers a initial 5-year contract. So again, if you're awarded, you will be awarded a 5-year contract. In that contract, as I said just a second ago, you'll be held to the number of campuses that you propose, the number of grade levels, and the maximum enrollment. It doesn't mean that you have to hit those campuses, but that is the ceiling for those campuses, the ceiling for those grade levels, and the ceiling for the enrollment, okay? All right, so that said, things change. Maybe you're rocking and rolling. Maybe you're doing better than you thought you would, and you want to grow. Unfortunately, you will not be able to grow until at least year 4. So that includes how many campuses, grade levels, enrollment. So should you want to grow in any of those domains outside of what you put in the application, you're going to have to wait till at least year 4 to expand. And that expansion is based on commissioner approval, and it's based on some performance requirements. So I say all of this to reiterate that it's very important that what you put in your application is what that you've researched, you feel good about, and you feel is viable, because you won't have the opportunity to change that or grow until much later in that 5-year process. Okay. All right. Want to talk about notification requirements. I'm going to kind of hone in on those who have been in this process before, because you have some context. All right. So prior to this generation, so this generation is the first one. Okay. The old way was that you would have to have at least one public meeting, and there were some notification requirements for that meeting, one of which you had to put the notification in a newspaper. You had to send some email notifications. That process has changed significantly. That is no longer a requirement. However, we highly encourage you to host those public meetings, not only for your benefit in terms of community engagement, as well as if you do advance the capacity interview or do advance later into the SBOE stage, it might come up what level of community engagement you've seen thus far. So it's not a requirement, but highly encouraged. The next piece that has changed significantly is the statement of impact forms. Again, prior, you would send out the statement of impact forms to the elected officials, to the superintendent of those school districts to which you plan to pull and enroll kids from. The new process is you do not have to do that anymore. Based on information that you provide us in the application, the agency then will provide that notification to those elected officials, to all of the folks that statutorily must be notified. The agency will secure that process. So again, you will no longer have to send those statements of impacts out. So if you're a returning applicant, you will notice that attachment's gone. So just bear in mind that you do not need to resend those. We will send those out. Okay. All right, so instructional materials, just for a quick second, we wanted to reiterate that expectations and information around instructional materials and the requirements for charter schools. Okay, so to be clear, especially for those who are new to our process, charter schools have the ability to design, select, and even implement instructional materials at that local level. However, charter schools must still cover, and I'll say this again, must still cover 100% of those TEKS, so the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. Those form the foundational curriculum in Texas, so you have to meet 100% of those. Also here at the agency, we provide many resources and guide in planning those TEKS aligned materials, but the agency has also in recent years created an open education resource, which are free for public use, so free for you all, and those have been evaluated through a very rigorous and vetting process called the Texas Resource Review, which I'll talk about. All right, so the purpose of the Texas Resource Review is to assist those districts in selecting high quality instructional materials. The Texas Resource Review is designed to provide those comprehensive, user-friendly information about the quality of those instructional materials using evidence captured by some teams here and Texas educators trained on a very Texas-specific quality rubric. So that means all materials are evaluated by standards-aligned teams. They follow the State Board of Education process to determine the percentage alignment with TEKS, the pre-K guidelines, as well as the English language proficiency standards. So as applicants, you are invited and encouraged to review the rubrics and evaluation materials to determine if those products would be a good fit for their proposed school model. Okay, so I did mention high quality instructional materials a few seconds ago. Kind of want to elaborate a little bit on that. So high quality instructional materials, you will hear us say HQIM. Excuse me. Those are research-based initiatives here in Texas to offer extremely high quality, proven materials to really enhance student learning and remove some burdens from teachers. So we've defined it here in the center. Again, this definition is littered throughout our application as well as instructions and guidance. So you really want to familiarize yourself with this because your instructional materials have to be anchored in this, right? So there are 4 components to what makes something high quality. The first is that it's aligned with TEKS, as I've already said, that it has a comprehensive and cohesive scope and sequence, includes lesson level materials with engaging text, and then lastly are externally validated or research-based. Okay, everyone's favorite topic is what can we ask you throughout the process? So in terms of communication, and again, Brittany and Sarah have alluded to this in their presentations, permissible communication, you can contact us as long as you want, but so long as your questions are technical in nature. So we are prohibited from giving you advice on what to put in it, advice on our opinions about something. All of those things we would not be able to handle. However, if you have trouble opening the application, if you have trouble opening the workbook, if you are having troubles with the workbook, things like that, you can certainly reach out to us and we can set up time to walk you through something and help you to the extent that we can. That also goes for agency staff. So throughout the day, you will hear our presenters say, reach out to me should you have any questions. Again, you are more than welcome to contact them with the same caveat, right? It is, if it's a technical issue, they are able to help you. But again, they are not able to help you with any competitive components of your application. Support seminars, I highly encourage everyone here to try their best to attend the support seminars. We offer these from October through November. Our last support seminar is actually going to kind of walk you through the prepping process for submitting the application, just some pro tips, best practices for that. Those support seminars are really just sort of a longer and more robust presentation of the materials that you will see here today. That will include governance, special education, emergent bilingual, all those things by content area specialists. We do record those seminars, so if you can't join, that's okay. It's not a requirement. It's completely optional. You can review those later. But again, attending them allows you to ask questions real time should you have them. And then lastly, office hours. We've been doing office hours for a few years now, and honestly, they have really become an asset to applicants. You can join the office hour and say nothing and just be a fly on the wall, or you can utilize that time to either, again, ask us technical questions, or you can talk to other potential applicants as well about anything that they are going through. And it's really just kind of become a I guess a thinking meeting, again, that we are not partaking into. We are answering technical questions, but you are more than welcome to interface with the applicants. And so those office hours really provide the opportunity to do that. So with that said, I will see if there are any questions. Someone's asking about geographic restrictions. So the geographic restrictions, again, kind of going back to the notification stuff, as the new rules become effective, the geographic restrictions more or less are no longer applicable to our process. And thus, so long as the school is in Texas, there would be no geographical restrictions for your enrollment. Alrighty, that's the only question I see. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah again.
Okay, thank you so much. For the next few minutes, we're going to cover our submission process, addressing when it's due and what you'll include, and where you'll submit all of your documents. Okay, so the first thing that I know that you all want to know is just when is it all due? So all of our applications are due by December 20th, 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. So I'm going to repeat that. And apologies if you hear barking in the back. I'm going to repeat that again. It's December 20th by 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. It's very, very important that you know the submission date and that you are making sure that you are prepping your materials to be submitted prior to that time, because it will take you some time to get all of your documents submitted into that share file. We do not accept paper submissions. For those applicants that finish their proposals early, you can submit your applications anytime before the official deadline. However, please note that the submission is considered final once you submit the first time. So you will not be able to resubmit. So we highly recommend that you use your time and make sure that it's in make sure that it's in by December 20th at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. Perfect. So let's go ahead and talk about the application documents you're going to include in your submission. So when it's time for you to submit your application, each applicant will at minimum have 3 files to upload. The first file being the narrative response document that I referenced earlier. As a reminder, the document is where all of the questions are located and where you'll input all of your responses. For the second document, you're going to take all of those attachments that you've completed and combine them into one big PDF file. We refer to this document as the attachment submission documents. We're going to discuss how you can assemble that file on the next slide. For the third document, you will submit your financial workbook plan, Please note that you will submit this document as an Excel file, the same format that you downloaded as and completed in. Please do not save that workbook as a PDF for submission. We will not accept any other format except for the Excel document. Lastly, if you are an experienced operator, you will have to upload one more file, the portfolio overview workbook, which is also going to be another Excel workbook that you're going to complete and submit as an Excel. So in total, for the new operator application, there will be 3 files you submit. 2 PDF files, the narrative document and the attachment submission document, and the 1 Excel file, the financial plan workbook. For experienced operators, there'll be 4 files that you submit. That's going to be the 2 PDFs that I mentioned, the financial plan workbook, which was an Excel file, and the portfolio overview Excel file. So let's talk a little bit about how you can actually assemble the attachment submission document. Perfect. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the attachment submission document requires some extra steps for assembly. From the outset, it's best to say the ultimate goal for you all is to take all of the attachment materials that you create and end up with one big PDF file. There are a couple ways you can do that. If you're a little bit more tech savvy, you can simply combine all of your documents in Adobe. For those of you who maybe are a little nervous about putting it together in Adobe, you can simply print all of your attachment cover sheets and the responses you created and scan them into one big file. That one file is where you're going to submit as the attachment submission document. Again, the ultimate goal, however you do it, is to go from a lot of separate documents, all of the linked attachments, to one big PDF file. And before you combine those documents, whether you do it electronically or you print and scan them, we just ask that you make sure you have page numbers on the bottom right-hand corner to make sure it's easily accessible for you all and for us when we're going through it. Lastly, let's talk about how you're actually going to submit all of this. So all of the applicants will use the link that is provided in the instruction and guidance document. If you can recall in the beginning of this session, I named that the instruction and guidance document will walk you through those submission steps. So it's really important that you go back and look through it. And that's where you're going to find this link. When you click that link, it will take you to a website called ShareFile. What is ShareFile? Well, ShareFile is similar to like a Dropbox or other cloud-based storages. You'll just upload all of your documents right into ShareFile. You can just use your drag and drop function. It's a pretty straightforward process, but we highly encourage you to attend our last support seminar. We called it Final Touches. It's already linked on our charter applicant page. That will happen in December. And in that, if there's any questions that you have for submitting your documents, we'll walk you through it and make sure that you understand the process. Additionally, I just want to make sure that you note in the submission instructions, it will also tell you that please make sure that you are ordering your attachments in the order of the checklist. So again, please make sure you're ordering that in the order of the checklist. If you are a little bit concerned right now, you're feeling it inside of you and you're like, I feel like I might need some more support on that, please make sure you're registering for that support seminar. We'll be more than happy to walk you through the process to submitting it. Team, anything else you want to add before we move on?
Yes. Sorry.
No, totally.
I'm the man with endless feedback. No, honestly, the share file is super easy to use, but I did want to just, again, as Sarah mentioned, giving yourself enough time before submission. That includes, as she said, there's multiple pieces that you have to upload, right? So if 5 o'clock hits and we have 3 out of the 4 or 2 out of the 3, we can only accept 2 out of the 3, which ultimately then makes your application incomplete, right? And that can't be something that we fix later. So it's extremely important that, yeah, you start as soon as you can, at least a couple hours before, getting that submission process going. And then that also allows us time. Should you be paranoid and wonder if it went through, that allows us time to actually confirm that we got something, okay? But if it's 4:50 and you're calling us with problems, that's going to be a real hard kind of uphill battle for you all to get stuff in on time. So just want to, I guess, put that out there and hammer it in.
Thank you so much, John. Beautiful. So now once the application is submitted, we move into the review process. So in the next slide, I'll walk you through what happens kind of behind the scenes once you've submitted. So what happens after you submit your application? Our team will begin combing through each application that is submitted on time for completeness. So just like John just named, if you're trying to submit at 450 and you only get 2 out of 3, that is not going to be the full application. So we'll be making sure that we're looking for that completeness. We'll look to see that your entity is actually eligible to apply. We'll look at all of the attachments to make sure they've been completed. And then we'll look at all of your board members and make sure they have their notarized documents and the letters of special assurances have been initialed and signed. Once those have been confirmed, we'll internally notify districts of your intent to apply for a charter school. As John mentioned already, this process is different from our historical process where applicants typically notify, but just note that once you have turned yours in, if everything is complete, we will be doing that on our end. So just to give you a little bit more information, as a part of our completion check process, there are instances where certain documents that are missing from your initial submission will be eligible for what we call remedy. In that event, we'll extend a 5-day cure period to you, whereby you'll be able to provide that missing documentation. However, there are also instances where applicants are missing documents or they came in a little bit late, and those would be ineligible for a remedy. The result of those missing documents would disqualify you from advancing further in the process. So some of those instances, again, we just want to keep naming it, is late submission. We are really hard on that 5 p.m. Central Standard Time deadline. If we do not receive it by 5 p.m., we will not be able to further process your application. And there's no excuses on that. So do not wait. If you are waiting until 4:58 and it goes in and it's 5:01, we will not process that application. So just want to make sure it's really, really clear because we know that it's a lot of hard work that's put into these applications, and we want to be really clear and upfront with you at the start. Perfect. The next thing an applicant would be removed from the process is if they fail to get their formation documents timely filed. So you need to make sure that you have your formation documents filed. They do not have to be approved at that time, but they should be filed. The other big area that we've seen applicants removed from the process is failing to complete application narratives fully. So if you submit an application that has substantially missing narrative responses, unfortunately, you would not be able to move forward in the process. So once we have looked and made sure that your application is deemed complete, all applications deemed complete are then scored for quality in what we call our external review. Please know that TEA does not score applications. That is done by highly qualified external reviewers. Each application that is deemed complete is scored by 5 separate reviewers. The 5 separate scores are then averaged together, dropping the highest and the lowest reviewer scores, which is whichever is higher between the adjusted score and the average score is taken. We're looking for cumulative averages of 85% or higher. In the event that the application has an average score that lands between 80 to 84%, the application will be then sent to a 6th reviewer for an additional score. So if you make the cumulative average of 85% or higher, your application then moves to the next phase of our process. For those who do not earn that minimum cut score, your application will be removed from the process, but that does not bar you from being able to reapply in the next application cycle. So I'll go ahead and check just to see if there's any questions before I pass it over to John to go over to capacity interviews.
You're good to go, Sarah.
Beautiful. If that's the case, then John, all over to you for capacity interviews.
Yeah, and before I talk about capacity interviews, just wanted to clarify one thing, just for those who are new to, I guess, business and entity formation. So, excuse me, as Sarah said, that December 20th deadline for your formation documents, right? So for those who are going to apply as a 501c3, there are 2 steps. First step is you actually have to file with the state, right? So the state has to recognize you as that nonprofit. And at that point, then you are authorized and able to then apply for that federal tax exempt status. So can't do 2 at the same time, right? So you got to get the state formation documents first. So in our application process, what we're looking for is proof that you have that's been filed. In terms of the tax exempt status, as Sarah said, but I'm going to hammer home, you do not need that final tax exempt status by December 20th. You need that much later, and that date is outlined in our application. It's when the commissioner proposes for award, okay? What I'm saying is when you apply, so when you submit your application, you're going to show us proof that you filed with the state and that you were legally formed in the state of Texas. And then second, that you have at least applied for that tax exempt status, right? So proof is, yes, I'm good and legal with the state, and yes, I have applied for that tax exempt status, of which I will show you that final status later before the commissioner proposes. Okay, just wanted to clarify that. So again, some of you folks are going to race out of here and start your formation documents. So just want to be clear as to what you all will submit on December 20th. Okay, alrighty, that said, let's talk about capacity interviews. So yes, if you make that 85% or higher percentage threshold, at that point, you will be invited to attend one of our capacity interviews that will be happening between May 7th and May 16th of 2025. So over the next minute, we're going to talk about when are those capacity interviews, kind of like the process, the format of them, and then like who participates in those interviews. All right. So as I said, if you make the 85% or higher, you get to go to the capacity interview. A long time ago, our capacity interviews were in person in Austin, and you had to sit there in person. Now we conduct those capacity interviews via Zoom. However, I want to just go ahead and say this. The capacity interviews for at least the last decade have been live streamed and recorded and archived, and they're available on our website. So what does that mean? That means that you are more than welcome to look at any of those capacity interviews. You will most likely see my face going back quite a ways when I had a lot more hair back then. All that to be said, though, you will notice as you watch these capacity interviews that the questions by and by do not change, which means our applicants more or less kind of either stumble on the same sorts of topics or we need clarity on the same sorts of topics. It would behoove everyone and anyone to look at those capacity interviews to kind of, as they're drafting the application, to see if your application before you submit it might have some of those weaknesses or ambiguities that we would ultimately address later. So maybe you can prevent that conversation during the drafting process. Okay, so in the Zoom interview, who actually is attending? TEA staff number 1 for 2 hours. Typically it's 2 hours. TEA staff will, you all field questions for TEA staff from Bridget with charter school law, with Dr. Rocha or someone else in emerging bilingual programs. Someone from financial compliance will attend that interview. Someone to ask questions rather about HQIM, high quality instructional materials, new school launch, and then special education. So there are a lot of folks that sit in on those capacity interviews from TEA side. On the other side, we also invite our State Board of Education members to join and to ask questions of any applicant that they wish. So our members do not have to attend all of them. They can attend one, they can attend all, and they're not limited to districts. So if your application is not in their district, that does not prevent them from joining, again, to ask questions or to just participate in silence. Either way, TEA staff as well as State Board of Education members are the interview panel. And should you make it that far, again, I would highly encourage you to look at those interviews to prep. And yeah, so we will certainly talk about capacity interviews more in that last support seminar. All right, Brittany, if you want to go ahead and talk to us about proposal and deliberation.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. So I want to close out our time together with a quick discussion about what happens after capacity interviews and then the rest of the road to your final application approval. So let's anchor us back to our timeline so we can kind of wrap up what this process looks like and put a little bow on top of it. After all capacity interviews are held in the middle of May, the commissioner will then take the rest of May to review those application materials, the interviews, and stakeholder support to make a determination around which applicant demonstrates the necessary ideas for success. On May 28th, he will issue his formal proposals, meaning those applicants will advance to the next stage in the approval process. Those proposals are then sent to the State Board of Education, who will then deliberate on those proposals in their June 2025 meeting. So the purpose of those deliberations are to determine if the board will exercise its statutory power to veto any of those proposals. So before we move on, let's simply go back and understand one thing. So in a nutshell, the commissioner decides who will receive a charter, and the state board will review those proposals, and they can either veto or not any of those stated proposals. If they do not veto, then those applicants keep going in our process. So we are now here in September where the application has been launched. Those applications were not vetoed by the next year. So any applications after that June meeting were not vetoed by the State Board of Education. We'll enter the last stage of our authorizing process. So a year later, so this is a very long process. That's why we really want you to kind of ground your knowledge in what it all takes to get here. So a year later, State Board of Education has not vetoed you. You're entering into that last stage of our authorizing process. Those applicants are afforded the opportunity to address any contingencies that may have been stated and noted by the commissioner. And all of those contingencies then get approved if you are in that state. The contract is typically awarded in October of that year. So if the contract is awarded, those newly awarded charter schools must then engage in a mandatory startup year, which is from October 2025 to August of 2026. So this startup year cannot be waived, so it is a mandatory requirement, leading those Generation 30 applicants that are awarded a charter to open their doors to students in August of 2026. So one thing I just wanted to reiterate that John had mentioned before, all applicants must obtain that final federal tax exemption status prior to the commissioner recommendation. Any applicants who do not obtain that status will be ineligible and you will not advance in the process. So a really nice buttoned up picture of what it looks like after capacity and how you move to serving students. So our last slide again just has our contact information on it. If you joined later and missed that at the beginning, we want to make sure you have that. Team, do we have any questions in the chat?
We don't have any questions at the moment, but I just wanted to reiterate one thing in the application that we do get pretty common. So hoping I'm getting ahead of the question is about facilities. So an applicant, as an applicant, you are not required to have a facility identified by the time you apply. You have to have a very good idea of where you will be opening. And you will articulate that in your proposal, but you do not have to have any sort of contract or lease for a facility by the time you apply. So just want to, again, reiterate that. But otherwise, there are no questions at the moment.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we're going to take a little cell phone break, stretch our legs a little bit, and we will return back with our presentation by legal. Do not log off the Zoom. We're going to stay right here. We'll just pop a little screen up that'll let you know our return time. So at 10:25, we'll come back together. I'll give you a little 2-minute warning before we start, and then we will have our legal presentation by Bridget. All right, guys.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Bridget Remish. I am from TEA General Counsel's office, and I work on all things related to charter law. So we'll go ahead and get started. First, I just want a little disclaimer. This is a very general overview of some of the legal issues that you should be aware of during the application process. These do not cover every statute or rule that you should know, both as an applicant or later as a charter. So I want to give that disclaimer. The legal issues overview, we're going to talk about governance, applicable laws and rules, and then admission and enrollment issues that you should be aware of. I want to take just a moment to sort of distinguish between laws and rules. The Education Code makes up the laws passed by the legislature. Much of the laws regarding charter schools are located in Chapter 12 of the Texas Education Code. Title 19 of the Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 100, contains the commissioner's rules regarding charter schools. Keep in mind that there are also other laws that are going to apply for charter schools that are not located in Chapter 12. We'll talk a little bit more about those later. A note about the commissioner's rules in Chapter 100, those rules have been updated and will go into effect any day now. The citations in this presentation, though, refer to the current rules, but just keep in mind that these citations will change here probably in the next couple days or weeks. But everything that was renumbered, this is really reflective of what is currently in effect. But again, these have been renumbered and the rules are going to be more user-friendly going forward. Okay, so these are the things we'll be covering regarding governance, the entities that are eligible to hold charters, the Texas Open Meetings Act, non-sectarian requirement, restrictions on board service, and then just some general notes. Okay, so eligible entities, subchapter D, open enrollment charters is really the focus here today, and probably what a lot of people think about when they think about charter schools. Eligible entities for subchapter D charter include institutions of higher education. The definition of what an institution of higher education is in Texas Education Code, Chapter 61. These institutions of higher education could include a public, a private, or even an independent institution. Also eligible entities, in which we see most of, is a nonprofit corporation exempt from taxation under 501c3. You must have a final IRS determination prior to consideration for an interview. And then these 501c3s can also not be governed by a sole member. The other eligible entity for subchapter D would be a governmental entity. Subchapter C, charter schools. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but these are essentially the 1882 partnerships. And these charters are actually authorized by an ISD and not TEA. Subchapter E, charter schools. The eligible entities include a public senior college or university or a public junior college. And then subchapter G, charter schools, are the adult high school charter programs. And those eligible entities include a nonprofit entity, a school district, an open enrollment charter, or an institute of higher learning as defined again by Chapter 61 of the Education Code. Okay, the Business Organizations Code essentially governs all business entities in the state of Texas. So just keep that in mind that charter schools have to be in compliance with the Business Organizations Code. They have different things in there that are requirements, including 22.204, which the number of directors of a corporation cannot be less than 3. If you have any questions regarding nonprofit corporations, those questions really should be directed to the Texas Secretary of State's Corporations Division. So just keep that in mind because that's another thing you have to consider. Okay, so eligible entities, the authorization requirements, the commissioner may grant a charter for an open enrollment charter school only to applicants that meet applicable standards adopted by the commissioner. Those standards are found in the rules in the Texas Administrative Code. The commissioner is also looking to see if an applicant can operate a school of high quality. but also keeping in mind past history of a particular entity. So these 2 bullets here that are listed, that the entity has not within the preceding 10 years had a charter under this chapter or a similar charter issued under the laws of another state, that has been surrendered under a settlement agreement, revoked, denied renewal, or returned, or is not considered to be a corporate affiliate of a substantially related to an entity that has within the preceding 10 years, again, had a charter under this chapter or similar charter issued under the laws of another state, surrendered under a settlement agreement, revoked, denied, renewal, or return. And this is all located in the education code. Okay, all applicants need to submit litigation history, including regarding any previous charters that were surrendered under a settlement agreement, revoked, denied renewal, return, either to Texas or even in another state. That documentation needs to be clear enough so the agency can determine eligibility of the entity that's actually seeking the charter. Okay, the 501c3 status is very important as an eligible entity under this, this requirement. If an entity loses that 501c3 status for whatever reason, the charter is automatically null and void, and the charter has to be returned to the commissioner. Tax-exempt organizations are required to file an annual information return or notice with the IRS. If an organization does not file for 3 consecutive years, the IRS will automatically revoke the tax exemption status. And it's noted here that the law does not give the IRS the authority to undo an automatic ratification, and there's no appeal process. So on the date that they were supposed to be filed is the date that the 501c3 status would be revoked. If you have other questions about this, of course, you can go to these links under irs.gov for some more information about that tax exemption status. Okay, the Texas Open Meetings Act is Chapter 551 of the Government Code, Texas Government Code. Open enrollment charters are subject to Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. Some of those requirements include that when the governing body meets to discuss public business, the body must post a notice of the meeting, including what the subject of the meeting is, at least 72 hours prior to that meeting. There are also some other provisions within that chapter about holding meetings online or individuals, members of the board who can't attend the meeting, and but the code really goes through all of those nuances about holding these meetings and what's required. It's not on the slide, but charters are also required to follow the requirements of the Texas Government Code Chapter 552, which is in regards to public information. So keep that in mind as well, that the Public Information Act is also required of charters. Okay, non-sectarian educational nature. Charters are required to be non-sectarian as traditional public schools are in all respects, including in regards to student admissions, employee hiring, instruction, visible religious iconography, which you may have to cover up if it's a decor within a building. And then, of course, naming student holidays in the school calendar, those must also be non-sectarian. So why must charter schools be non-sectarian? Well, 2 reasons. One, under the U.S. Constitution, under the Establishment Clause, Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion. And then, of course, the Texas Constitution states that no money shall be appropriated or drawn from the Treasury for the benefit of a sect or religious society. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the restrictions on board service. These are pretty important things to know in creating your board. Okay, the general rule about nepotism restrictions is that a public official cannot hire, select, appoint, confirm the appointment of, or vote for the hiring, selection, appointment, or confirmation of an individual if the individual is related to the public official within the 3rd degree of consanguinity, which is by blood, or affinity, which is by marriage. So who is a public official for purposes of a charter school? Public official means a member of the governing body of the charter holder or the charter school, an officer of the charter school who retains the final authority to hire or terminate employees, which would typically be your superintendent. Other things to note about nepotism restrictions: no family members within the 3rd degree of consanguinity or 2nd degree of affinity shall simultaneously serve on the board. And then a board member's relative within the 3rd degree cannot be employed by the charter holder or charter school. There are some exceptions that apply there. I'm not going to go into those, but just keep these in mind when forming a board. So again, by blood or by marriage, these are just some examples of relatives within the 3rd degree of consanguinity or affinity: a spouse, child, parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, grandchild, great-grandchild, sibling, aunt, uncle, or niece or nephew. So again, by blood or by marriage. Okay, the rules state that an applicant cannot ask questions of the review panel or TEA staff during the application period. Failure to follow the no contact period will result in the application being ineligible for award. If the charter is awarded and the agency finds that there are some issues regarding nepotism, the agency will advise the applicant of those issues, and those would need to be corrected before the agency issues a contract. Okay, conflict of interest restrictions regarding compensation. In general, because a member of the board cannot receive compensation from the charter holder or school, they cannot serve on the board and be an employee. There is an exception to this, but this exception would not apply until the 4th year of operation. The exception essentially requires that all schools operated by the charter holder receive a satisfactory rating for 2 of the preceding 3 school years. At that point, the charter school employees can serve on the board as long as the employees don't make up the majority of the board, or if it's a committee, that they can't make up the majority of that committee as well. Okay, again, the rules state that an applicant cannot ask questions of the review panel or TEA staff during the application period. Failure to follow the no contact period will result in the application being ineligible for award. Again, if the applicant is awarded the charter, the agency staff will advise the charter if there are any conflict of interest issues that are outstanding that would need to be resolved before the agency actually issues the contract for the charter. Another thing to note regarding conflict of interest, if the charter is going to work with a management company, a person either serving on the governing board or as an officer or employee of the school cannot have a substantial interest in a management company that the charter contracts with. Substantial interest is defined by statute, and it includes someone who is employed with the management company. So an individual couldn't be receiving compensation from both the management company and the charter school. Okay, criminal history restrictions. A person cannot serve as a board member, an employee, or an officer if the person has been convicted of a misdemeanor involving moral turpitude, which is those crimes that sort of shock the conscience, a felony, and that's any felony, an offense listed under Chapter 37, which are offenses that an ISD student must be expelled for. Those are pretty serious offenses, or any offense listed in the Code of Criminal Procedure, Article 62. Again, those are very serious offenses. There is a little note on the bottom here that Chapter 12 allows a person to be employed if the person actually could be employed by an ISD, by a school district. Okay, just some other notes about criminal histories. The CEO of the sponsoring entity must certify in the application that no board member has the criminal history restrictions as noted in the last slide. Criminal history checks through the Texas Department of Public Safety must be conducted before the person begins serving as a board member or a person is hired. In terms of the application, though, the individuals who will be serving as board members, they will have their criminal history checks completed every year thereafter. Okay, non-delegable duties. So there are specific powers and duties that must be exercised by the governing body. They cannot be delegated to another entity or another individual. So those specific non-delegable duties are listed here. So the governing body has the final authority to hear or decide employee grievances, citizen complaints, or parental concerns. They have the final authority to adopt or amend the budget or to authorize the expenditure or obligation of state funds or the use of public property. The final authority to direct the disposition or safekeeping of public records. The final authority to adopt policies governing charter school operations. The final authority to approve audit reports, which are required under Texas Education Code Chapter 44. And the final authority to select, employ, direct, evaluate, renew, non-renew, terminate, or set compensation for the superintendent, or if you call him a CEO, the CEO. Some final notes on governance. Statement regarding bankruptcy history must be included in the charter application. Each board member who will be serving on the board must complete a biographical affidavit, which is also to be included in the charter application. And that board member is essentially certifying that they their background information, but then that they are also able to serve on the board and are eligible to do so. Also, the majority of the board members on a board for charter school must be qualified voters, essentially Texas residents, and that is under statute. Okay, so applicable laws and rules. So as I stated before, much of charter school law is located in the Texas Education Code, Chapter 12. Subchapter D is really what we're looking at here. And then but then it's covered in other areas as well. We talked about the rules a little bit. We talked about the Texas Business Organization Code, Texas Government Code, and then of course the Texas Local Government Code. And then there are things just scattered throughout the Texas Education Code that would apply to charters. But these are just some general requirements that are both applicable to both ISDs and charter schools. That's on the left column. These are really laid out in 12.104 in the Texas Education Code. So special education requirements are going to apply to charter schools as well. Bilingual education, ESL, PEIMS, TEAC, STAR, graduation requirements, the open government laws that we talked about with the Open Meetings Act and the Public Information Act, pre-kindergarten, and then health and safety under Chapter 38. Those are going to apply to charters as they do for traditional school districts as well. On the right side, you will see differentiation between ISDs and charter schools. There's greater flexibility with certain things. So there's greater flexibility with the student-teacher ratio and the class size for a charter school. Teacher certification requirements. The certifications are really limited to those teachers who are teaching specific populations in a charter school. So pre-K, special education, and bilingual. Chapter 21, which essentially is teacher contracts and also requirements for certification regarding educators. In general, there's greater flexibility, obviously, there with charters. Chapter 37, which is discipline. Chapter 37 requires certain things of ISDs regarding student discipline that is not going to be required for charter schools. Charter schools also have greater flexibility with school calendars and admissions, except in regards to some criteria regarding admissions that I'll go over in the next couple slides. Okay, so admission and enrollment issues. The statute requires that the commissioner adopt a common application form that must be used by applicants for admission to an open enrollment charter. These application forms must be easily accessible to families. So on the website, charter schools can also print them out for families as well. During the enrollment process, it should be noted that after the student has been offered admission, the school can then ask for items such as past academic achievement, medical history, and documented history of discipline problems. So you can only ask for those things after the student has been offered admission to the school. Okay, admission policy requirements. So open enrollment charters are required to have an admissions policy that prohibits discrimination based on sex, national origin, ethnicity, religion, disability, academic ability, artistic ability, athletic ability, or the district the student would otherwise attend. And this is in statute. I also want to note here, though, that federal law is also going to apply. So keep that in mind as well, because there are some protected classes that federal law also recognizes. Two other things to note, Texas law permits charter schools specializing in performing arts to admit students based on artistic ability and audition. And then federal law requires that if a charter school is oversubscribed, that a lottery system is used, and that lottery system has to be described in your admissions policy. Your policy is also going to require a set application period. Of course, the non-discrimination statement also has to be in the policy. If you are excluding certain students because of documented discipline problems, you will need to ensure that that is stated in your policy and that it's clear. Your policy also needs to explain the application process itself, including the lottery process, as I just mentioned. All of that needs to comply with 12.1173. Of course, charter schools may not charge admission fees and cannot require parents to volunteer, attend sessions of commitment to the charter for admission. Okay, enrollment records. Just some notes here. Schools cannot prohibit students from enrolling pending receipt of enrollment records. If records are not furnished within 30 days, the statute requires that the school notify law enforcement to determine whether the student has been reported missing. McKinney-Vento Act is also going to apply to charter schools, the federal statute, which essentially requires that a school enroll a homeless student immediately, even if they cannot produce records. Okay, so that's all I have. Again, this was just a general overview. It doesn't cover everything you need to know about charter law, but I think you can take away some pieces here with this presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bridget. We really appreciate you being here, providing some really good information. There was a few questions in the chat that we went ahead and captured. We will be posting a page that has frequently asked questions on there. So feel free to check that if you feel like your question didn't get answered, or if you come up with another question after our Zoom has ended. But we really do appreciate you joining us today. Team, do you have anything else? Wonderful. All right, guys. So since we have just a few minutes, we're going to have our financial plan workbook team come and talk to you here in a minute. So we're just going to take a little break until 11, and then we'll come actually 11:05. And I will give you a 2-minute warning right before we start back with John, Dina, and Peja. So at 11:05, we will come back as a group to go over our financial workbook. We do have a question in the chat, and I think, John, you are going to maybe start with that before we get into our financial, all the wonderful things. Okay, wonderful.
We had a question about growth, and the growth specifically in the question was about number of campuses and geography. Just to kind of go over what we talked about earlier. So in your application, you're going to be prompted to designate and propose X number of campuses. There is no limit to that number of campuses. I do want you to, would recommend that folks go back to the slide that Brittany talked about in terms of kind of like where on average the size of our operators and number of campuses that they operate, just as again, just as a tool, maybe a calibration tool for consideration. That said, just reiterating that what you put in your proposal is what will ultimately go in the charter contract should you be awarded. So if you say over the 5 years, we propose 3 campuses, then if you're awarded, we would authorize, in theory, 3 campuses. Is there an opportunity for growth and expansion? Yes, there are requirements for that, and those requirements would not really kick in until, Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong, year 4. So ultimately what we're telling applicants, and we tell applicants every year, what you put in your application, you need to be solid on for at least the first 3 years of operation, because you will not be permitted to grow again across grade levels, enrollment, things like that. In that question, someone asked, well, is there a geography limitation to it? And then going back to something Bridget said about our rules changing and those being effective any day now, within those new rules, the geographic consideration has been removed, and thus you are more than welcome to, again, outline an enrollment plan that would go outside of any quote unquote geo boundary that we may have discussed in the past. That said, I also want to express that your campuses don't need to be within the same district even, or the same city. So case in point, some applicants in the past have said we want 5 campuses. 1 in San Antonio, 1 in Austin, 1 in Dallas, 1 in Houston, right? And then they would then designate what years they plan to open those. So that. The last thing I'll say is in terms of the numbers that you put, again, going back to we have a 5-year contract, right? So if you say you want 3 campuses, we are not going to require that you open those 3 campuses in year 1. You can, again, in your application, designate to us and tell us what years you plan to grow. Same thing with grade levels. You do not have to offer all grade levels in year 1. So if you're going to be a K-12, you can certainly start with fill in the blank grades, and then you will show us how you will then grow those grades over time. I hope that makes sense. For the person who asked that question or anyone who has a follow-up question, please feel free to put in the chat and I will try and elaborate or clarify. Okay. Now, let's talk about the financial plan workbook. So first thing, as Sarah mentioned, there is a very, very robust requirement. The financial plan workbook, you will download it as an Excel document. Take 30 seconds to talk about how you access that workbook. So again, as Sarah mentioned, you will access all attachment information in the narrative document. So on the cover sheet as well, within the narrative, there will be a hyperlink. It will say attachment, fill in the blank, financial plan workbook, and you can access it from there. So if you haven't accessed it, that's where you would find it. If you have accessed it, you're more than welcome to open it. And again, ask questions today, should you have any. And it goes back to, we can talk about technical questions, but we can't talk about logistical questions. All right. Okay, so let me share my screen. Can everyone see the first tab? Excellent. All right, so just as a preface, so when you open the workbook, you will be filling this out through the perspective and lens of an LEA, not a campus. So that means you're going to be submitting only one of these workbooks. So if you're going to propose multiple campuses, one workbook. So this is at a district level. This is a district level financial plan, if that makes sense. So all this information will roll up and account for all campuses across all five years. Okay. All right. So when you open it, you will notice that there are several tabs at the bottom. Rule of thumb If it's green, that means we anticipate or expect you to fill something in on that tab. There is something on that tab that requires you to input data. The blue tab, those blue tabs are locked, and those are summary tabs, which means that they are calculating from data that you have put in those green tabs. I will say this up front. We highly recommend that you fill out the workbook in its entirety before you ask a question, unless it is a blatantly obvious question. And I say this because a lot of times, if you see data not really like changing in another tab, it's because you haven't filled something out that requires it to then calculate with another cell. So please feel free to reach out to us about any of these tabs. Again, if it's a technical question, we can certainly approach it and get you some sort of resolve. I highly encourage you all, should you have problems, when you email me or you email Peja, please reference the tab and the cell that you're having problems with. That way we can unlock the workbook and see what data is actually feeding that cell, and then kind of target where you might be having problems, or again, where there might be data that you actually need to input. Okay, so green tabs, blue tabs. Green tabs, you should and have to input information. Blue tabs are for review purposes only. All right, so the first tab is the cover sheet. And that cover sheet is going to give you a couple of really big pieces of information. One of which is the reasonable planning estimate here. So that's $7,233 per student that you can budget, or $3,617 for students enrolled in pre-kindergarten. The other piece that I want to alert you to is here. I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, is the federal startup grant that you are eligible to receive as filling this application out. Nate will talk to you in the afternoon session about the specifics of that grant. However, there are some mechanics within our workbook that do require you to kind of notate any contributions of that grant to some of your financial plan, and we'll get into that. The next tab is the general instructions tab. This is more of a technical guide, a technical manual for you. So just to show you, again, what you're going to fill out on each tab, very specifics. And again, if this doesn't answer your question, feel free to reach out to us and we can try and get your questions resolved. All right. So the first tab is the easiest tab. You're going to just input your student info. And as a reminder, your your year one will be 2026. Okay, so your year one will begin 2026. Your startup year will be 2025. All right, there is an enrollment tab. Dean is going to talk about this in greater detail, but just as a high-level overview, you will again have to account for your enrollment growth and program enrollment across all 5 years. Okay, so again, that's going back to, we have initial 5-year contract, so we want to see a financial plan and growth across each of those years. Some of the tabs you will also indicate your startup year. There's a personnel tab. You will account for all the positions again across all 5 years, not just year one. Okay. So you'll include the position description here, and then there's a drop-down menu that you will then categorize that personnel into. You'll indicate the salary and the number of FTEs. And then do not forget, if you're going to have yearly raises, that you also have to account for those here. A big tab is the next one. This is going to be your startup year and year one and assumptions tab. Here you will input all your anticipated federal revenues, state revenue. As you can see, it's blue, which means what? It means you don't fill it out. Anything white is what we expect you to fill out. Here you'll itemize your expenses, operational, facility, and then it will net everything down at the bottom. Now we're getting into the blue tabs. Again, these are the summary tabs. There's the budget tab. This is going to be a high-level overview of your revenue and expenses. your summary of finance tab, which Dina will talk about briefly, momentarily. There's a payment formula example for your use. And then lastly, there's the financial plan workbook summary. This is a one-pager. This is if you need to print it out, give it to a stakeholder, give it to someone. This is ultimately what you could print out. 10,000 foot view of your 5-year financial plan plus your startup year. Okay. That said, Dina, do you want to go ahead and begin your conversation about your tabs? Do you want me to keep the workbook open, or do you want to open your own?
No, I think it would be best if you go to the enrollment tab and I'll speak from there. You did a good job of guiding it. So hi, I'm Dina Black. I'm in state funding, and Kylie's not here, but she and I provide support to open enrollment charter schools in the state. This enrollment tab is just as it's named. You as a prospective charter will be providing enrollment figures, and you'll do it from year 1 to year 5. Please note that if you start with a population with pre-kindergarten, that for that particular tab, if you hover over that year 1, it should tell you that you're going to be reporting half enrollment. So that's real important. So if you have, let's say you anticipate year 1, you're going to have 100 pre-K students, you would report that as 50, because those are funded at half ADA or half enrollment. And then you'll also be breaking that down for purposes of this enrollment worksheet by grade level. So you would be doing that. In addition, down there below, there is this and other worksheets, they're protected. So any area that's in white is a data entry field. Anything that's blue would probably be provides a calculation. So thank you. So right now, what's being demonstrated is entering some enrollment figures, 50 for second grade, so on and so on. What that does there on that top portion is that then it gives a calculation of the total number of students for that year. And then there is an area for average daily attendance. Right now, it's pre-populated at 85%. And you'll notice throughout this worksheet that there'll be a red triangle in certain cells. This is an area for you to get more information about that field before you enter data. You can certainly update that attendance percentage, but 85% is just being very conservative in terms of the attendance percent rate. That's always subject to change. So after the general enrollment area, and you're doing that, I do recommend that you go from top to bottom, year by year. There's other areas of student population based on instructional arrangements. So there where it says student population, if you anticipate to have these students that are enrolled be in any of these various instructional settings, then you would provide those enrollment counts as well. There is a second column and next to the student population for special education that says EY. So that's if the charter school has an extended year beyond the regular instructional time period. So when you need more information, you can look to the red triangle cells for that instructional arrangement. And also there is a resource, I believe it's in the packet, on the Student Attendance Accounting Handbook, which gives more comprehensive information. Further down, there's career and technology. So there's data based upon the type of courses. If you anticipate you're going to have grade levels 7 through 12, and you're giving courses, providing courses for career and technology. As you scroll down a little bit more, thank you. There's also an area, again, more instructional arrangements, dyslexia, Parkinson-related bilingual. Again, enrollment counts with sums for each of those years. The only area in which you're going to put a non-enrollment figure is under transportation. So if the charter anticipates that they'll have some kind of busing program or provide bus passes, or will be providing routes to get the students to school, you can hover over the red triangle cell and it gives you a way to calculate that, to estimate that. And that information is there. Like for things like that, we could give you additional assistance, but technically the information is provided there on how to calculate that. Normally, a charter that opts to do transportation is either getting reimbursement based on bus passes, or they're actually providing route services to and from their origin of home. So if you go back up, John, I know you put a couple of figures there. Oh, what I wanted to demonstrate, I think we've done this before. If you put in one student, so we're just saying there's one student, what is that, first grade. I just want you to see how year one is what is being used to populate and determine the average daily attendance, the FTEs that are coming into the SOF tab. So you could just briefly go to that tab. So that one student at 85% attendance rate generates a refined average daily attendance of 0.850. So if you scroll to the bottom and you look at the amount there, 7243, that closely matches to the cover sheet, which is to demonstrate for a student, one student in the first grade that's there the entire school year, 85% attendance, that would generate the charter school about $7,200. Likewise, if you went back to the enrollments tab, you would, if you change that to 0 and put, 0.5 for, like, say you had one student in pre-kindergarten and that's 0.5 up above, not in kindergarten, the other one. Sorry. Thank you. And go back to the SOF tab. You can see how that changes. You're only getting half for that one student that's a pre-K. You're getting about 3,600. All right. So you can go back to the enrollment tab, put a couple of figures in there. Doesn't really matter. One of the things that you just noted that John actually demonstrated that I didn't tell you. So there is like quality assurance and data validation. So as I mentioned, you want to start from top to bottom so that you can, determine your estimates for enrollment by grade level. And then if you were to put any other figures that don't make sense, like for the subpopulations, where like you put in a value of enrollment that exceeds the number of students that you've estimated, then that would create a data validation issue. And so all you have to do is cancel, retry, and correct that. So once you've done that breakout, in the summary of finance, I'm just gonna move to that, the summary of finance. Again, this particular summary of finance is only tied to year one. So in the summary of finance, it's supposed to match, or the SOF represents summary of finances. It's supposed to match closely to what you would see if it was published by the agency. And it always starts with refined average daily attendance, and it has each of the different ADAs and FTE values that we are calculating based upon the enrollment information put it in the enrollments tab, multiplied by the attendance rates. And it also provides a field for the weight. So that just lets you know, based on whatever FTE or ADA is there in the calculations below on this worksheet, where it's talking about calculating different allotments for the various instructional programs. It's taking, in general, the district basic allotment that is currently at 6160. That's on line 53, multiplied by the count, student count, which would either be ADA or FTE, FTE for career and technology and special education, times that weight. So the weights are there so you can see that. And then over there where it says program intent codes, that below that is where all the allotments are that are being calculated based on the information you've provided on the enrollments tab. And then I'm trying to think. I don't believe you can actually specifically see the formulas in the calculation, but as I mentioned, it's based upon account times the district basic allotment times the weight. Now there is a section there that says tier 2. That's based upon weighted average daily attendance and the state average district tax rates. So even though charter schools in the state can't levy property taxes, they still are entitled, like local school districts, to this allotment. So what the agency does and what's in rule is that there's a statewide district tax rate. So that's what this tier 2 is related to. And then for year 1, basically it's the tier 1 and tier 2, and that makes up your overall state aid.
So Dina, can you clarify, just for our listeners who are new to this process, the number that big number that they see at the bottom, that's a yearly total, correct?
That's correct. That is a yearly total.
Okay.
Right.
And also, John, since we're on that question, based on enrollment, are you given the same amount regardless of the grade level?
So Dina, other than pre-K, are first graders and third graders funded at the same amount, or do you distinguish between grade levels in terms of funding?
No, we don't distinguish between grade levels. So any kindergarten through 12th grade would be funded at the same rate. And it wouldn't be any difference between whether or not the student was in 12th grade versus kindergarten.
So I think that might be all the finance questions we have so far, Dina. So what I'm going to do is pivot to Peja. Peja's role in this process, other than being familiar with the workbook, is a big function of her contribution during this process is for those who make it out of external review and then proceed to capacity interview. At that time, the agency will start to review applications and prep for those interviews. And so Peja is one of the primary staff members that will internally review these workbooks. And she will draft interview questions. So again, if you go back and look at those capacity interviews, you will see my face and you will see Peja's face going back quite a ways. So with that said, Peja's going to go ahead and give you sort of a high-level overview of some best practices and things to consider. So let me get your presentation set up, Peja. There we go.
Hi, thank you, John. My name is Peja, and I work in the Financial Compliance Division. I work with Joe Herrera, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the financial workbook planning. So as John and Dina went over the enrollment screen, excuse me, the financial workbook has different tabs, and one of the first tabs is the enrollment tab. So we really recommend that you use realistic numbers for your estimates of enrollment and be conservative in your approach, because this number directly drives the expected revenue. And so overestimating your enrollment numbers can cause you financial trouble later on. And always remember to enter the percentage of the average daily attendance. Like Dina mentioned, 85% is a conservative percentage, but you have to enter that field because that calculates the state revenue that your charter will receive, and it gets it populates the startup and year 1 tab. And like we mentioned before, the workbook has different tabs, and the data you enter in one tab populates and carries over to the other tabs. So it'll be really helpful to you if you navigate through the different tabs of the workbook and get comfortable with it before you finalize your financial workbook and submit it to us. Provide a detailed narrative startup plan and outline the costs associated with all the startup activities. So the way I do my review is I go through each line item of the workbook and then read the budget narrative and the attachments that you provide and make sure that the amounts budgeted in the financial workbook align with what is stated in the budget narrative and the attachment. So please keep in mind to make all the numbers need to match up and correspond. And provide a description of the assumptions in the notes area that is in the startup year one tab, and also the personnel tab, because this really helps us with our review. And if you're going to use CSP grants, please mention that in your notes. And budget for reserves. This is really important because in case you have like an unexpected expense or the revenue falls short, then it's important that you have a reserve as a backup and a contingency plan. And we also look to see if your charter has community support, because most likely a charter that has support from the community will succeed, and that also includes financial support. So please include all the letters of commitments that you have from your donors and your charitable institutions. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. And I'll be really happy to help you. Or you can reach out to the charter division and they'll forward your questions to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Pooja. I did want to go back to the workbook really fast to show you all the notes column that Pooja was talking about. So on the personnel tab, you'll see there's a notes column here. This is where you would input all your notes to clarify any line item, as well as, again, on the, where did it go? Which personnel tab? And it got sworn. Yep, and then there's notes columns as well in the assumptions tab. As Pooja mentioned, and as Nate in the afternoon block we'll talk about, yes, please make note of any CSP contributions that will be applied to any of the revenue activities or expense activities. That said, do we have any other questions, Brittany, Sarah?
Give me 1 second, John. John, can you talk a little bit about a geographic limitation or restriction, like when they initially launched their charter school?
It looks like you're.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was on purpose. I was like, maybe he's signaling me.
No. So applicants, again, are not required to be any designated place for year one. But again, in the application, you will put with pretty good specificity where you intend to be, down to projected zip codes even. It is not a requirement per se, but again, as we vet your application and as we make considerations for it, how viable is your plan to serve the communities? Are you familiar with the communities? Are you prepared to meet the needs of those communities? So as long as you are able to facilitate those needs, then you are more than happy to propose anywhere within the state of Texas. There's no real geographic spread that we would require necessarily. And I hope I answered that question.
Perfect. I think we are all caught up. Anything else from our finance team? Perfect. Well, thank you guys for joining us and providing some really pivotal information. This is a big piece of the application, so we want to make sure that everybody feels confident in what they're doing. Awesome. So as we kind of move forward into the rest of our afternoon, we will have some time this afternoon for a few more presentations. So we want to make sure you guys are aware of that. So if we don't have any questions for our finance team, and if we do later on, something pops in your brain, feel free to just add it in there. It will be added to our frequently asked questions, and we can cover it that way. Or you can reach out to them directly to get an answer. Again, we are limited on what we can do as far as answering those questions since the application is out. But if you're just not sure how this line connects to this line, we can walk you through that. But we won't be giving you any feedback on perfect enrollment numbers or how to equate something to making your school viable, but we can answer those technical questions. So we do not have any other questions in the chat. Team, before we go ahead and head to lunch, do you guys have anything else you would like to add? Christy as well, finance team. Awesome. So we are a little bit ahead of the curve, which is awesome. But we will come back at 1 p.m. You do not have to log out. We don't want to lose you. So we'll pause kind of everything here. We'll return back at 1 p.m. And then we're going to start our presentation on our CSP. Nathaniel will join us to kind of go over all of those questions. And then we'll just keep moving with our afternoon. So we will see everybody back here at 1 over our charter school program grant. He's going to give you a lot of information. Nate, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Brittany. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch break. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we will be discussing the CSP Startup Grant. So my name is Nate, and I am the Charter School Program Grant Specialist and Interim Project Director. I've included my email on this slide as I will be your point of contact for anything CSP related. I've also listed Charlotte Werman and Carmen Patrick on this slide as they help me facilitate the CSP grant, and they will be in communication with you at different stages of the grant process. So here's an overlook at our agenda today. We will discuss the purpose, who the eligible applicants are, grant processes and timelines, your budget and the use of funds, and the highlights from the application questions. And then we will finalize the presentation with a Q&A session. So we'll have about 10 minutes for that. So please drop any questions you have in the chat or in the question and answer part of Zoom, and I will address them all at the end. So the purpose of our charter school program grant, CSP grant. Some background on it. This was a $100 million grant we received from the U.S. Department of Education in the fall of 2020. The grant period runs from October 1st of 2020 through September 30th of 2025. So it ends in a year and 4 days. We at TEA will award funds to you, the LEAs, as sub-grantees to open and prepare new charter schools, in y'all's case. And we also run competitive CSP opportunities to replicate and expand schools that meet our high quality definition. So the overall purpose of the grant is to support the growth of high quality charter schools in the state of Texas, especially those that are focused on improving academic outcomes for educationally disadvantaged students. So who are the eligible applicants for the startup grant? Eligible applicants must, 1, be recommended by the Commissioner of Education and not vetoed by the State Board of Education. 2, the applicants must meet the federal definition of a charter school as defined in ESSA. So please note that in order to be eligible to apply, you must meet that federal definition. And then to continue receiving CSP funds, you must continuously meet all aspects of that federal definition throughout the entirety of the grant period. And finally, you must never have received CSP funds under ESSA before. And I want to expand on that, number 3. So if you, the applicant, are affiliated with or are proposing to contract with the CMO, you will need to disclose if that CMO is currently receiving CSP funds from USDE or if they do not receive CSP funds directly from USDE. USDE does offer a CMO CSP grant. So please note that if your campus receives any of those USDE CSP CMO grant funds, you are not eligible for a CSP grant from TEA. So they can have the grant, but if your campus receives any portion of that grant, you will not be eligible for this competition or for this opportunity. So some grant processes. You, the sub-grantees, will complete the CSP grant as part of your Generation 30 application. The CSP grant application questions are embedded within that application. Those application questions will then be externally reviewed, and some contingencies may arise related to your responses in the grant application. If your charter is awarded, you, the applicant, will submit 2 supplemental documents to the Grants Administration Division. The first of those documents being the grant application, and the second being your budget worksheet. Those 2 documents will then be reviewed, and then negotiations will take place between you and Carmen, our grant negotiator. Once those negotiations are complete, you, the sub-grantee, will receive your Notice of Grant Award, abbreviated as NOGA, and will be able to begin submitting requests for reimbursement. One thing to note about these negotiations is that the more prompt your responses are, the faster you will receive your NOGA and can request reimbursement for allowable expenses that you've incurred since the start of the grant period. Let's say if you receive your negotiation notes from Carmen and it takes you 2 or 3 weeks to respond to the changes she requests, your NOGA will then be delayed by 2 to 3 weeks, and that delays your ability to be able to request reimbursement. So please be as prompt as possible once that negotiation process begins. So the CSP grant is a reimbursement grant. The funds are not front-loaded to you as the grantee. So these awards are up to $900,000. You'll be able to request reimbursement for allowable and approved expenses. However, you will not receive any of that money up front. You will submit reimbursement requests to us through our expenditure reporting system, which you will get access to along with your NOGA. So some grant timelines. There is the grant start date, which is the date by which you can start incurring costs related to the grant and receive reimbursement. And then there is our NOGA date, which is the date that the NOGA is approved after those that negotiation process is completed. And you, the LEA, can then start entering expenditures for reimbursement. So let's say Campus A spent 2 months in negotiation and gets their NOGA 2 months after the grant start date. They will be able to request reimbursement for any expenses incurred from that grant start date to the NOGA date. However, those expenses must be allowable per the CSP program guidelines, and they must also be in your approved application. So if you are to receive a CSP grant, please make sure that any cost you are planning to request reimbursement for that occur between that grant start date and the NOGA date adhere to your proposed budget and are allowable under the CSP grant. Just to note, we will go over allowable and unallowable costs later in this presentation. So the CSP grant is broken into 2 different phases. First is the planning phase, in which you can conduct planning activities related to the planning and program design of your charter's educational program. These activities usually take place from the start of the grant period and can go until the first day the campus begins serving students. Please note that these planning activities cannot occur for more than 18 months. Then you will move into the implementation phase, where you can conduct implementation activities related to the implementation of your charter's educational program. These activities usually occur between the first day the campus begins serving students and the grant end date. So you'll see here at the bottom of the slide, we have our planning phase. This is our grant start date right here. Up until the first day of school is the planning phase, which cannot last longer than 18 months. And then we will move into the implementation phase of the grant, which goes from that first day of school to the grant end date. So budgeted expenditures are tied to the type of activity, not when the expenditure occurs. So there are planning activities and implementation activities. Everything you put in your budget will be in one of these 2 categories. So please note that some purchases that are allowable during the implementation phase may be purchased before the first day of school during the planning phase. They will still be budgeted as a part of your implementation budget. So the phase in which a purchase is allowable is determined by the type of activity and not necessarily when the purchase is made. So an example of this is classroom furniture, desks, smart boards. Those are considered implementation activities, but you need those before the first day of school so that the kids have places to sit and something to learn from. So you can purchase it during the planning phase, although that expense is tied to implementation. So please note that some activities are only allowed as planning activities, some are only allowed as implementation activities, and then there are a few that are considered both. So during the planning phase, you can request reimbursement for specific personnel salaries. You can pay for contracted personnel. You can also request reimbursement for any rental or occupancy costs. However, in the implementation phase, you can purchase equipment, supplies, materials such as textbook, any sort of technology and equipment, and classroom furniture. But that is only considered an implementation activity. Then there's a sort of gray area in between where there are a few expenses that can be purchased and are considered both planning and implementation activities. Examples of this include professional development on curriculum for your staff, or purchasing any sort of recruitment materials to let the community know about your charter school. So planning activities are tied to the planning and design of the educational program of your campus, which includes the refinement of the desired educational results and the methods for measuring progress towards achieving those results, and professional development of teachers and staff who will work in your charter school. Just to note, historically, we have seen a lot of our CSP grantee campuses budgeting for planning activities tied to professional development. That being said, you are not restricted to just that. And then implementation activities are tied to the implementation of your charter school and its educational program. So this can include informing the community about the school, acquiring necessary equipment and educational materials and supplies, acquiring or developing curriculum materials, and finally, other initial operational costs that cannot be met from state or local sources. So regarding the budget and the use of funds, before we get into that, I just want to go over some grant management basics for y'all. So the grant start date will depend on when that funding memo is released to the public. So we are not able to provide a date by which this grant is going to start, as it is variable upon that funding memo release date. All expenditures and services must take place within the grant period. So from the grant start date to the grant end date, any expenses that are incurred between that period that are allowable and are aligned to your application and the proposed budget are eligible for reimbursement. Anything before and after those two dates is not eligible. You, the subgrantees, will have access to your notice of grant award and be able to submit requests for reimbursement after negotiations are complete. Requests for reimbursement are entered through TEA's expenditure reporting system and require proper source documentation for approval. You're not able to just say, we conducted $75,000 worth of professional development for our staff. We're going to need invoices with dates on them that show that that activity occurred and that that source documentation needs to match the amount you're requesting for reimbursement in that system. All expenditures are approved manually by me. So we will need all that source documentation before we approve those expenses for reimbursement. And finally, amendment requests must be submitted and approved before the proposed activity or budget change takes place. So if you are considering, oh, we over budgeted for salaries, let's move 10,000 from our proposed salary budget, our payroll costs, to contracted services. So you will submit an amendment request. You cannot start undertaking those changed activities until we've approved it. You will need to get approval on that budget amendment before you're able to start to change how you're carrying out the CSP grant. If you have any questions about if an amendment needs to be requested or submitted, please email me and I'll be able to guide you in that process. So moving on to our allowable uses of funds, please note that the next few slides will not contain the full list of allowable or unallowable activities. We could probably spend 30 minutes going over every single one of those. Please note you will find that finalized list of allowable and unallowable activities posted in our grant program guidelines that will be posted along with the grant opportunity on the TEA Grants Opportunities page. We ask that you please read these program guidelines in their entirety before beginning to craft your application, as it will tell you absolutely everything you need to know about the grant opportunity. So All costs associated with the CSP grant and your budget must meet the minimum threshold of being all four of the following things. First, is the item necessary for the startup of the charter school? So when you're filling out that application, please ask yourself, is what you're proposing to purchase necessary to accomplish the goals you established in your CSP application? Two, is it reasonable, and that would a reasonable person spend that amount of money on an item, and would it withstand public scrutiny? So if you're proposing to serve 5 students, but are requesting $850,000 in administrative costs to take care of those 5 students, that would not necessarily be considered a reasonable request. So make sure that the outcomes in your application are justified by the amount requested. Third, is the cost allocable, and that is it being incurred specifically for startup, and is the cost proportional to the benefit provided? And finally, is it allowable? Is the item allowed under the CSP grant program? Again, that information will be found in the grant program guidelines. So some examples of some allowable costs for planning activities. You can cover the planning and design of the charter school's educational program, professional development and training for teachers and staff, and special education support. Moving forward on to, and I just realized there's a typo on this slide. This should say allowable costs for planning activities at the top. My apologies for that. Salaries are allowed for the following positions only: teachers, school leaders, and specialized instructional support personnel. What constitutes specialized instructional support personnel will be clarified in the program guidelines that are posted along with the grant opportunity. Please note that regarding salaries and payroll costs, certain conditions do apply. First, salaries cannot be paid for activities related to ongoing campus operations. Payroll expenditures reimbursed with CSP funds are only allowable for activities that support the planning or program design of the charter campus. And no payroll reimbursements will be given after the 30th calendar day, after which your campus begins serving students. Finally, please note that if your campus personnel split their time between ongoing operational activities and planning activities, only the portion of time associated with conducting the planning activities is allowable as an initial operational cost. You at the charter school campus must maintain accurate time and effort records to document the amount of time each employee works on tasks related to the planning activities associated with the charter school campus. So some more allowable costs for planning activities. You may also pay contracted personnel from the grant start date up to 30 days after the campus begins serving students. Additionally, you can request reimbursement for rental or occupancy costs for your school's facility up to 30 days after the campus begins serving students. One thing about contracted personnel is please note that reimbursement for contracted personnel is only allowable during the planning phase. Certain contracted services are allowed in both the planning and implementation phase. However, the use of contracted personnel is only allowable during the planning phase and up to 30 days after the campus begins serving students. So I know for the last 3 things, I mentioned that 30 days after the campus begins serving students. So I wanted to visualize that for you and expand on that table I showed you earlier. So during the planning phase and up to 30 days after the campus begins serving students, personnel salaries, contracted personnel expenses, and rental or occupancy costs are eligible for reimbursement. However, the second you reach this point, 30 days after the campus begins serving students, all 3 of these personnel salaries, contracted personnel, and rental or occupancy costs are no longer eligible for reimbursement. If you are to submit a personnel salary reimbursement request 31 days after the campus begins serving students, we will be denying that. So please keep this in mind as you're crafting your budget. Moving forward to allowable costs for implementation activities. Again, these are, we can fund one-time startup equipment purchases that are necessary to implement your charter school. So desks, chairs, computers, and tablets for students, equipment related to technology, physical education and art, playground equipment. These are all expenses that you can request reimbursement for. Furthermore, you can request reimbursement for non-consumable supplies and materials for startup activities. So these are non-consumable supplies and materials, or those that can be reused. They're multi-use materials, such as textbooks, library books, reading materials, and teaching materials. These are all eligible for reimbursement. Consumable items, which are items that cannot be reused. So I'm thinking student workbooks that they write in, pens, pencils, papers. The expenses for these consumable materials are not eligible for the reimbursement grant. They must be considered non-consumable for us to reimburse them, and they must be one-time, not recurring costs. Some more implementation activities that are allowable: installation costs associated with computers, data systems, networks, and telephones, the installation of smart boards in your classroom. You can request reimbursement for that. Furthermore, you can request one-time startup costs associated with providing transportation to students. So if you want to use your $900,000 and your CSP award to purchase a bus for students, that is allowable. You can do that. Finally, or additionally, costs associated with carrying out minor facilities repairs and any necessary renovations on the building are allowable. Please note that these minor repairs and necessary renovations neither add permanent value to the property nor appreciably prolong its intended life. So this is some guidance we have received from USDE, and these types of budgeted expenditures may require their approval. So examples of these minor facilities repairs and necessary renovations include repairing a leak in the roof of the campus, replacing a broken window, replacing a broken HVAC unit. In summation, these minor facilities repairs do not appreciably prolong the intended life of the building, nor increase its value, but rather keep it in efficient operating condition. Please note that construction and cosmetic renovations of any sort are not allowable with the CSP grant. And then finally, some other implementation activities include financial management software and training. Please note that these software costs must be a one-time expense. So if you need to pay $1,000 for a certain financial management software, and that is a one-time fee where you pay that $1,000 and the software is yours to use as you please for the remainder of your campus's time, that's good to go. But if it is a $200 a year subscription to a software service, we are not able to reimburse you for any sort of subscription payments. Must be a one-time cost. Additionally, you can purchase property insurance to cover equipment purchased with CSP grant funds. So if you purchase 10 smart boards and you want to purchase insurance on all 10 of those smart boards, as long as those 10 smart boards were bought with CSP grant funds, you can also use CSP grant funds to purchase insurance for those CSP purchased items. And finally, you're allowed to use CSP grant funds to reimburse other appropriate non-sustained costs that cannot be supported from other sources. So when you're crafting your budget, please note that the CSP grant funds will be divided into implementation cost and planning cost. Please keep in mind the phase in which the expenditure activity is allowed when creating your budget. So we have a great new resource that I want to plug that we've released in the past year. Whenever this grant is posted to the TEA Grants Opportunities page, the program guidelines would be posted with it, as well as this planning and implementation guidance. The planning and implementation guidance is an incredibly detailed document that will help you determine if an allowable expense is considered a planning activity, an implementation activity, or both. So we ask that you please utilize that as you're crafting your budget. So to review, the CSP grant supports the planning, program design, and initial implementation of public charter schools. And this is a very important part. All costs that you're requesting reimbursement for must be one-time costs, not recurring expenses. So some unallowable uses of funds, that includes field trips, hosting or sponsoring of conferences or advisory councils, cost of membership in any civic or community organization. As mentioned earlier, you're not eligible to request reimbursement for salaries or contracted personnel beyond the first 30 days of the implementation phase of the charter school, which is the day the school begins serving students. And you are not able to request reimbursement for any sort of debt service or lease purchase. Furthermore, as discussed earlier, No reimbursement for rental or occupancy costs beyond the first 30 days of the initial implementation phase. You are not able to use funds to purchase or lease land or real estate. You are not able to fund any sort of construction or cosmetic renovations. Only minor facility repairs are allowable. There are no purchase of consumable, instructional, or other supplies and materials. Again, non-consumable supplies and materials are allowed. Consumable is not. There is no reimbursement for accounting or bookkeeping services except for the purchase of accounting software to comply with FAR. And there is no purchase or reimbursement for apparel or promotional materials for your campus. I'm thinking swag for the campus, no school logos on jackets, school logos on pens, pencils, papers. None of that is eligible for reimbursement. And finally, this last slide of unallowable costs, you cannot use it to reimburse expenses for annual audit services. You're not able to use it for any sort of ongoing food service. That's for students and also parents and community members. So no reimbursement will be given for the purchase of snack trays or sandwich trays for community engagement events. There's no reimbursement for property or liability insurance you might have, except for property purchased with CSP grant funds, as mentioned earlier. You're not able to pay down any interest on loans with CSP grant funds, nor fund deposits of any kind, such as security deposits or service deposits. There's absolutely no reimbursement given for religious instruction, materials, or insignia. And finally, there will be no reimbursement for extracurricular activities such as UIL, competitions, athletic programs that are not part of the state required physical education program. So we're going to do a quick knowledge check. I'm going to give you all a minute and a half to just go over the following list of budgeted expenses and decide whether it is allowable or unallowable based off of the knowledge I've presented to you in the presentation so far. All right, it's been about a minute and a half. I'm going to throw all of the answers up on screen and we can see how you did, and I'll go over all of them one by one. So first, painting a large mural in the cafeteria with the school's name and mascot. It's a wonderful idea. I remember how much I loved the mural in my elementary school growing up. However, this is considered a cosmetic renovation and is not allowable. Second, a passenger van to provide transportation for student. One-time costs related to transportation are allowable, therefore this is allowable. Third, technology and technology installation for every classroom. This is considered part of an implementation activity and is allowable. Four, the salaries of clerical and custodial staff members during the planning phase. So you can request reimbursement for salaries for specific personnel during the planning phase. However, clerical and custodial staff members are not considered or do not fall within that group of allowable personnel. Therefore, this expense is not eligible for reimbursement. Next, instructional supplies that are reusable. Textbooks and library books are examples of that. So yes, this is allowable because this is considered these are considered non-consumable items. They have multi-use, so you are able to request reimbursement for non-consumable supplies and materials. Next, shirts, pens, pencils, and notepads with the school's logo and name printed on them. Again, swag of any sort is not considered an eligible expense and will not be reimbursed. The price of repairing the faulty HVAC system in the school building. This falls under the category of minor facilities repairs and is therefore allowable. Again, just a reminder, some of these types of expenditures may require USDE approval. And then finally, staff development focused on instructional strategies as part of teacher induction. This is allowable during both the planning and implementation phase. Then please feel free to include that in your budget if you want to pursue that. So we will now move on to some application highlights. All the following questions you're about to see is what is embedded in your Gen 30 application document. For sake of time, we will not go over all of them. I just want to touch on a few of them.
Hey, Nate, really quick, before you keep going, this question is really under the allowable and non-allowable, so I figured it would be good to answer it right here. So would renovations to bring a building into compliance be allowable?
I'm 95% sure I have the answer to this, but I do not have 100% confirmation. I see it was Nicholas that asked that question. Would you mind dropping your email in the chat and I will follow back up with you once I'm able to confirm this answer?
Thank you, Nate.
Of course. So you'll be asked to discuss your proposed use of CSP funds. So the planned activities and expenditures of those funds, as well as the disaggregated costs. So you'll list all of your allowable grant-related activities for which you're requesting funds. You'll also discuss how you plan to maintain financial stability after the end of the grant period and the expiration of that $900,000 in funding. You'll need to discuss the board oversight and how they're going to monitor the implementation of the startup plan, the startup grant, and the associated budget. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. CSP SMART goals. We'll need you to identify 3 to 5 SMART goals that will be achieved during using the CSP startup grant funds. And they should be achievable by the beginning of year 3. So a 2-year period. You'll also need to talk about the roles and responsibilities of any sponsoring entity, partner organizations, or CMOs, if that is applicable to you. There are 2 questions around community engagement. First, how you built and assessed parent and community demand for your proposed school. And second, how you'll be soliciting the feedback from parents, families, and the community on the implementation of in the operation of your proposed charter schools. Next, there will be 2 questions around student transportation. As I'm sure y'all know, charter schools in Texas are not required to provide transportation to their general student population. However, charter schools are required to meet the transportation needs of, first, students that are receiving special education who would be unable to attend classes without transportation services outlined in their IEP, and second, students eligible under Section 504 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act who would be unable to attend classes without special transportation services. So even if you're not planning on providing transportation for the campus, you will need to discuss how you plan to meet the needs of those students that fall into those 2 categories. And finally, there will be a list of federal CSP grant assurances. We are required by the U.S. Department of Education, who gives us this grant, to include all of these. We will need you to read them closely and initial all of them, indicating your agreement with them. This will include the federal definition of a charter school. Please note these assurances must be met throughout the life of the grant to be for your campus to be eligible to continue receiving funding. And with that, I am now open for any question. See one from Paul. Does the applicant have to serve more than 1 zip code? Yes, you can serve more than 1 zip code and be a CSP grant recipient. You're not required to just serve 1 zip code.
All right, thank you, Nate. You seem to be all caught up with all of the questions, and if we get any more, we can always send those your way and have you follow up with whoever has specific questions. Just one note here, the CSP information is built into your Gen 30 application. It will be posted, like Nate said, but in your application, it will have the prompts you will need to answer. So you don't have to go search for that. But I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware that it is in there. Anything else, Nate, before you go, team, anything else before we transition to special education?
I want to thank you all for your time today. Nicholas, I did record your email, so I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can on that. But as Brittany mentioned, if y'all have any questions, y'all saw my email at the beginning of the slideshow, please feel free to reach out with anything you might need.
Thank you, Nate. You're awesome.
Y'all have a great day.
Awesome. So right now, team, I think we're all caught up with questions. And Scarlett, nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. We will get started with you. Let's just see if anything pops in the chat or in the question and answer feature for another 2 more minutes or so. And then we'll get started with you, Scarlett. Awesome. Well, I don't see anything in our question and answer. So Scarlett, you should be able to share your screen. I will allow you a few moments to introduce yourself and then give all of our wonderful people here today some great information.
Okay, thank you. I am going to share screen 2. I can get this number out of the way to start from beginning again. Is it sharing?
Not yet. We do not see your screen.
All right, let's try that one more time. I will get this going.
And right now, there we go.
There we go. Okay, and are you guys seeing the correct version of it? The one that is the presentation model? Yes, thank you. Okay, yes, greetings and thank you guys for inviting me to come back. I do want to align us on a common mission. Together, Together, we are committed to high expectations and strong systems that achieve equitable outcomes for every student with diverse learning needs. My name is Dr. Scarlett Pappas, and here in the Office of Special Populations, I specifically monitor all of our charter schools for special education compliance. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to move us through both our charter monitoring system so you know what to expect from operations and how TEA monitors schools, but then we're going to spend the majority of our time just going over the very high level basic things that you need to know when it comes to special education, so kind of our FAQs. What you're seeing here is our differentiated monitoring support model. This is updated annually. We always encourage people to go to our website and look at the handbook for monitoring. The Department of Review and Support at the TEA strives to improve the special education monitoring process for Texas local education agencies. Our differentiated monitoring process is designed to assist LEAs in improving special education services and moving schools towards positive outcomes for students. What you're seeing here is that we have a couple of different pathways for monitoring. You don't need to know that for your application process, but you will need to know it if awarded a charter school. One is going to be our targeted. That's the section that we look at the data every year and we determine, are these going to be the same things that we monitor for? Our cyclical is a process that we're really proud of. This particular model, the one that you see in purple, know that every single school in the state of Texas, well, I won't say school, I will say district, every single local education agent, LEA or district, goes through a cyclical monitoring process every 6 years. So we will reach out to your school if awarded, and we will request student level data to ensure compliance. You'll learn more about that model down the road. So as I said before, every local education agency or LEA in the state participates in the cyclical review on a 6-year rotating schedule. We're super proud of the fact that we are actually in cycle 6 of the first time that we brought back cyclical monitoring to the state of Texas. So we're actually celebrating that at the end of this year, every single school that had been open when we started this process in 2018, we can say we have engaged with that LEA at some level here in the Office of Special Populations. That is a feat because we're a very large state. Cyclical reviews are intended to provide a comprehensive analysis of the LEA's special education program, including a review of the LEA's special education policies and practices. Each year we divide those groups into 3. So group 1 runs October through December, and group 2 is January through March. Group 3 is April through June. And if you're wondering what that cyclical schedule looks like, we have those published. You can actually click on these links and you can see, well, where was the school district monitored that I'm super curious about. You can control find and see where they were in our monitoring cycle. We also just published our schedule for what we're referring to as phase 2. So LEAs that opened this year, they're already in there. Next year, we'll just keep adding to that list of that cyclical schedule. When you enter into that phase, what we do is we have a process referred to as year 1 monitoring on my team. So year 1 focuses on the systemic process in place to support special education. However, we know these systems will likely change as they are implemented in a new school setting. Therefore, during the year 1 site visit, we joined the charter authorizing team to provide feedback on child find procedures, plans for professional development specific to special education. We really want to know how you're planning to self-monitor to make sure that you have ongoing compliance. And then we're going to look at your staffing to support student needs. These are the requirements for charter schools in the first year of operation. What I want to encourage people to do is to go ahead and take a look at these things, because this is what you're going to want to start planning for, especially as you're thinking about what do I need to know going into the application. But then if awarded in year 0, when it comes to special populations, what are my key things? These are the requirements for charters in their first year of operation for us. This process does not include a desk review or any student-specific information. What we look for is statutorily required for operations. However, we also want to know how we can support you guys and what you need in that first year of operation. So we really focus a lot on providing any technical assistance that you guys request. So child find, we expect to see the board policies and procedures to be linked in what Texas refers to as the legal framework. Other items we hope to see when we visit include documents or resources that are used to track that information. We also want to know how you're planning to manage transfer students. Again, those things also have very specific timelines in special education. Professional development, be ready to tell us about what you plan to do to support students and teachers as they come in. I think when you think about convocation or teacher induction program, we want to know what are you planning to inform staff about when it comes to special education. Under self-monitoring, what we want to see there are specifically your tracking. Like I said before, there are timelines. We'll talk about those in the FAQs, but they're very specific. You only have X number of days for certain things. So we want to see that you have tracking for that, because you're going to have to submit that to the state annually. And then effective staffings, we tell every applicant that special education staff must be certified under the direction of a certified special education teacher. We'll talk more about that in our FAQs. So without further ado, let's kick it off. So who is responsible for supporting special populations? That would be absolutely everyone in that school district. Special education requirements are federal, so they are the same for all LEAs. There's nothing special between charters and ISDs. You are all required to follow the federal requirements for special education. So admission cannot be denied because a student has an individual education plan or IEP. Child find requirements are the same and must be reported every year. All requirements for academic, let me hit my button. All requirements for academic, functional, and related services must be described and implemented in the IEP. You will learn a lot about LRE. LRE stands for the least restrictive environment. We'll talk more about that as the deck goes on, but basically what we're talking about are your instructional arrangements, and you need to have a continuum of them. And lastly, you must have certified special education staff and then additional staff to conduct evaluations and oversee the implementation of any services that may include modifications to the curriculum. I like to share the self-assessment here because I like to think of it as a guidepost for looking at the quality of a special education program. Again, we talked about things that you can be doing in your year zero. Your year zero, if awarded a charter, these are your heavy hitters. What does a good quality special education program look like? This is your guidepost. The graphic shows each area an LEA should consider in a systemic review of their special education program. The blue represents the 7 prioritized areas. However, all compliance items are required for the completion of this. This is something that starts in your first year of operation. These areas do align to our DMS, that model that we showed at the beginning with our monitoring. It does align with our domains of implementation, student outcomes, and family engagement. This is to help you guys develop a system that really supports students with disabilities. Please consider who will complete the evaluations carefully and ensure that they meet all of the requirements. For example, parental consent is one of the first pieces to an evaluation process. That consent must be in the native language of the parent described. They need to be able to describe the evaluation procedures and ensure that the parent agrees to the evaluation in writing, but understand that it is voluntary and it can be revoked. Please also know that the day the school receives that signed consent, it triggers a timeline for completing the report. What we see a lot of times is that people contract, they contract those services, especially for evaluation staff. You're going to want to make sure that they're following these timelines, and you're going to want to have a system for internally counting and making sure that they're hitting those timelines, because ultimately you, the school district, are responsible for that. So these are important. If you have questions about your special education staff requirements, please review to the federal and state requirements. In brief, all charter schools have the same requirement as all other LEAs to provide special education services. We do have there are some technical assistance resources that we can provide, but suffice it to say, what is required for any school is also required for your school. When it comes to special education, the caveat there is specific to special education. Many charters, I had said this earlier, I'm going to repeat it again because it's just that important. Many charter LEAs contract with a third-party provider to complete evaluations or to provide those related services like speech and language or occupational therapy. Please understand that you are still responsible for ensuring the compliance of those services. Remember that IEPs are legally binding. there's a lot of information that must be documented in an IEP. For example, the admissions review and dismissal or ARD committee must make decisions about accommodations and modifications, the frequency and duration of services, and they must consider extended school year services. You need to know when transition plans need to take effect, and if there's any training that should be provided to meet the needs of the student. These are things that have to happen every single year. The PLAF. This is important. The PLAF stands for the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. This is one of my passion pieces. I am always reviewing PLAFs because to me, this is where your general education and your special education work together to say what is the most critical and urgent need for this student, and how do we look at our data and use all of those pieces to develop that impact statement. So that means the ARD committee must consider multiple factors, including the student's strengths and academic and non-academic needs in the development of that IEP. And therefore, the PLAF must establish an overall baseline of strengths and needs to determine those annual goals. Now we're going to get a little bit into the least restrictive environment. Like I said, we're giving you a high level here, but I want to introduce you to these concepts. So when we talk about least restrictive environment, students with disabilities must receive their instruction in an environment with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate, appropriate being a key word there. Schools must ensure that a student is not removed from the general education environment unless the nature or the severity of the disability is such that the student cannot be educated with supplementary aids. And we do have a graphic that is going to wiggle and say that general education should always be the first consideration. Should be the first consideration. It's not the only consideration. So the federal requirements also require that LEAs have a continuum of alternative placements to meet the needs of students with disabilities. The continuum must include instruction in a regular education classroom, often referred to as mainstream class, special education classes like a resource room. A self-contained setting means that a student is instructed away from non-disabled peers for more than half of the day. And you may need to consider homebound instruction for some students, given some circumstances. This could include hospital instruction. What I want to say here is you do not have to have all of these, because it's really depending on what your students need. What you must consider, though, is how could you plan. I refer to this as contingency planning. These are just a few of the instructional arrangements that are available in Texas. You do not have to have all of these placements available, but the placement must be made available if the ARD committee determines that it is appropriate to meet those needs of the student. Okay. We are presenting information that can be found in the IEP Development Guidebook. Linked is a digital version of a technical assistance resource I recommend to every charter. I think that every single one of your teachers and your administrator should have a copy of this or access to it, but I will admit I'm just slightly biased there. The U.S. Department of Education enforces Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 as amended. It is often referred to as Section 504, a civil rights statute prohibiting discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Section 504 covers qualified students with disabilities who attend schools receiving federal financial assistance. To be protected under Section 504, a student must be determined to 1, have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, 2, have a record of such impairment, or 3, be regarded as having such an impairment. In addition, Section 504 requires that school districts provide a free, appropriate, and public education to qualified students in their jurisdiction with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more life activity. A student may have a disability but not need special education services. To qualify for special education services, the student must have an identified disability, and as a result of the disability, be required to have special education or related services that require specially designed instruction. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips for Child Find. Number one, provide orientation and training to staff. There is documentation and timelines that can support this process, but I would say anytime any staff is being onboarded, you want to make sure that they know their requirements for Child Find. Take an active approach to identifying students with a disability. The law states that LEAs may not wait for others to refer students for services or request an evaluation. Review your Child Find procedures annually. That's not required, but I recommend it. And look for opportunities to always continuously improve. Generate factors that may trigger a need to refer a student for an evaluation. For example, an LEA may not deny or delay an initial evaluation because previous interventions have not been implemented. That's basically saying you can't say, no, we can't evaluate your child because we haven't done RTI or MTSS. Doesn't mean you always have to evaluate. You're going to want to learn your special education. Consider the various needs a student with an identified disability may need in one of the 13 categories. I say that because, again, I always want you to be contingency planning. Students or special education students are general education students first, and most will receive special education or related service in the general education setting. Therefore, coordination and collaboration are essential. As you're planning those master schedules, I would say always look for opportunities for special education and general education to collaborate. Who can make a special education referral? Parents, school personnel, or any other person involved in the education or care of the student. Lastly, these are some of the sticking points. Referrals can be made verbally and they are not required to be in writing. So if someone hits you in the carpool lane, yep, it counts. That timeline started. LEAs must respond within 15 days to a request. And before an evaluation can begin, the parent must be notified and provided the procedural safeguards. An LEA may, I've said this now 3 times, but I'm going to say it again. LEAs may not deny a referral or delay an initial evaluation or pre-referral because you haven't started those intervention processes. Those are a good idea. We don't want to over-identify. Special education is complex. There are a lot of dates and timelines that must be tracked, and we require them to state reporting. Many new charter schools hire contract staff that do the evaluations. That is great, but I do want to encourage you to know these basic timelines. And I would say, as you're looking at how you develop those contracts, I would really encourage you to think about these timelines, and if they miss timelines, what are your actions there? Because that can get tricky. You have those 15 days to respond to an evaluation, the 45 days and the 30 calendar days. Those are annual submissions to TEA. So day one of the doors opening, you need to be tracking when those consents are received, when those evaluations are due, what are the exceptions of those. And when do we have those meetings for eligibility? Those are very, very big. Those are important. Like I said, those are things that you report to the state, and they're federally required for us to state up to report as well. The ARD committee is responsible for the IEP development and decision making during the ARD. IEPs must be reviewed at least annually and more often as appropriate. As appropriate could include lack of progress towards annual goals, reevaluation results, eligibility determination, or any other matter to meet the student's anticipated needs. What you see in the graphic is you see the people in blue are always required to be at the table, always. The people that you see in purple, these are the people that may be required to attend the ARD meeting. That's why I say, when you do your hiring, you want to make sure that you have someone on staff that knows special education very, very well. Specially designed instruction means adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the student's unique needs and ensure the student has access to the general education curriculum. That's the key component of special education services. I heard Nate talking about this before I came in, so I think you guys have already heard. Transportation is transportation is a related service. Therefore, if the ARD committee determines that a student is required to have transportation, then you're going to have to provide those transportation services. So I would account for that. Again, think about that contingency planning. We launched this last year and we've gotten a lot of really good feedback. Check out our new technical assistant site. This is a public site. Educational researchers and leaders in the field are collaborating with the Texas Education Agency to develop timely, meaningful, appropriate, and high-quality resources to guide educators in supporting their students. Our learning library contains a lot of unique opportunities for educators to participate in online courses, workshops, events, and conferences. You can explore the learning library for professional development designed to support new and experienced educators of all types. I said there are online learning resources, there are online courses, there are certainly things that you can use to develop what that professional development may need, may include. Please stay informed. We encourage everyone to sign up for updates to our webinars and our newsletters. We've provided those links here. And last but not least, we are a mighty team. But we are a small team. So my director is Lori Merrill. I am the manager, and then I have 3 people that report into me, and basically the 4 of us support every single charter school in the state of Texas. So you'll get to know us if awarded a charter school. That is everything that I have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to open it up to questions.
Awesome. If we have any questions, we can review those in the chat.
I have a question that says, is it true that charter schools can have a full inclusion model or do not have to have resource classes or self-contained classes? If the charter school has a transfer student that was in a special education unit and we don't have that unit, can we just put the student in a general ed class? Whew, that's a loaded question. Let's break it into those 2 parts that you have. Can you have a full inclusion model? The simple answer there is you can have a full inclusion model if it is meeting the needs of every single one of those students, and you can demonstrate that you are not, how do I put this? You will expand that continuum upon need. So we're not going to create things that students don't need, but we're also not going to say, well, we don't do that here. And I think that's really where we get into the second part of that question is if a charter school has a student come in, I would say I would be thinking about your contingency planning, because when I had a transfer student, and I would say this carefully, I would say I would want to be able to defend what my ARD committee decision was there. And I would want to be able to observe that student. I'd want to have data to support changing of placement. That's how I'm going to answer that question. I want us to make sure that we're meeting student needs and not adult needs on how we design our school. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah.
Appreciate you so much, Scarlett. We want to make sure that if we do get questions, we can forward those to you. And then if something comes up and they need to reach out to you, you've already shared your information. So we really appreciate you being here and being able to share all of this great stuff. Team, anything before we let Scarlett head on out? Awesome. Well, thank you again.
All right, I will see y'all later. Thank you. Bye.
All right, so we do have a little bit of time for any more questions that may arise in our question and answer function. If not, we will take a little break and return back at 2:40. At that time, we will have a presentation by our emerging bilingual team, so you can get some information on that. And as of right now, I don't see anything. So we will come back at 2:40. I'll give you your 2-minute warning and then we'll get started. Here today, and we are going to have some great information about serving our emergent bilinguals. I will let her introduce herself. But before you get started, Julie, just as a reminder, we are using the question and answer function to enter those questions. This will actually be our last presentation of the day. Then we'll move into some question time and then we'll close you out for the day. So Julie, whenever you are ready.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Charter team. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Julie Lara. I'm the director of the Emergent Bilingual Support Division here at the agency. And I am going to be running this deck by myself, so I cannot see the question and answer. I'm happy to support in any way or however the Charter Division has set that up for you all. But today, welcome to the well, not welcome, you guys have been here already, but for the Gen 3 application process, we'll be talking about serving emergent bilingual students. And so I'll just go ahead and get right in it. This is your small but mighty team. I am the director. We fortunate to work with 6 other individuals who are incredibly passionate, knowledgeable, and skilled about serving emergent bilingual students across the state of Texas. Our goal here at the EB Support Division is to lead the state with intentionality and focus at the blueprint level of the development of a variety of supports that equip EB students for academic success. All students, including emergent bilingual students, deserve access to equitable programs, instruction, and materials that lead to positive school outcomes. The topics for today, it's going to be fast and furious. I got about 40 minutes. I think we've got 5 pretty meaty topics to talk about. I'll first share with you some general demographics about our EB population in Texas. We'll go on to talk about what bilingual education services and our state-approved program models. We'll talk about LPAC, program implementation, and then finally some funding sort of topics and discussion. So moving right in, emergent bilingual students in Texas. An emergent bilingual student, by definition, is a student who is in the process of acquiring English and has another language as their home language and or primary language. Emergent bilingual student is the actual state term, and that's been since I want to say 2021 that term has been the state's term. We no longer use limited English proficient or English language learner. You will still see English learner, EL, because that is the federal definition and it takes Congress changing that. So that likely won't happen. So just know emergent bilingual student, you will see that in all of our state documents. You will also see English learner in any of our federal documents, talking about the same group of students though. And so since 2017, you can see here, there has been a consistent, pretty steady increase in the population of this group of students. We used to be 1 in 5, now we're 1 in 4. Another tidbit, Texas serves the most emergent bilingual students in number and in percentage in the entire United States. For a while, California had been, we had been number 2 to California, but I think after COVID, our numbers increased and California's decreased. So we have quite the charge. Many states, I was actually just on a national call, many states look to Texas for guidance and really for best practices and the different things that we're doing in Texas for emerging bilingual students and for particularly for how to support the rapid increase in numbers. And so a little bit more information about this group of students. Again, 1.3 million emergent bilingual students. That's one out of 4. Of that population, 13% of those students are also being served through special education. That means they're duly identified, meaning they have been identified as having a disability. 10% of that 1.3 million are identified as newcomers. And what I bolded here was really important because it's somewhat disproportional, actually very disproportional. Only 4% of our emergent bilingual students are identified as gifted and talented. And 15% of our students are enrolled in CTE courses. The bottom left here, you can see that we have about 1,200 school systems in Texas, and 99% of those school systems serve EB students. So the majority, overwhelmingly, if you are making making a decision as a school leader about school systems in any way, you are definitely making a decision that will impact an emerging bilingual student. So my goal today is to just share some information with you all, and definitely open or let you know that we are here to answer any questions and help support through technical assistance. So that 1.3 million students, where do they sit? Who are they, right? So I'll talk a little bit about bilingual education in Texas. But first and foremost, a question that often comes up is, are open enrollment charter schools required to provide bilingual or ESL education? And the answer is yes. Unequivocally, yes. The Texas Education Code 12.104 states that open enrollment charter schools are subject to the requirements outlined in subchapter B, subchapter B, chapter 29, related to bilingual education. This is one of my favorite slides, graphics. It's really important that everyone have a working understanding that, again, this is State Education Code and Texas Administrative Code. We have 6 bilingual, state-approved bilingual programs. We have, once you meet the rule of 20, meaning you have 20 students in the district or in your charter who speak the same language and are in the same grade, you are then required, per state statute and law and rule, to implement a bilingual program. If you look down to the purple and blue, there are multiple bilingual program models, which I will get into in a minute. If you do not meet the rule of 20, you have multiple students in your class, in your charter organization who speak a variety of languages, then you are required to implement an English as a second language program. Those are 2 different program models in green. ESL content-based and ESL pullout. I have some demographics, some numbers in a little bit, but I really wanted to kind of help you understand when we talk about bilingual education in Texas, we are talking about both bilingual programs and English as a second language programs. And then there's program models, right? It gets very sort of confusing, but once you internalize it, you'll be able to better understand. Here is a data slide that really kind of looks at numbers and where our kids are sitting. And so it's pretty busy. It's something that you can look at and sort of and internalize if you'd like later. I'm going to talk about a little bit of the high points here. That dark navy blue ESL pullout, that 36% of that 1.3 million students, 36% of them are in ESL pullout classes, which means only their RLA teacher is certified is an ESL certified teacher, which means those students are only getting targeted support, language support in their reading language arts classes. We all know, though, that there's academic content knowledge and need for linguistic supports in all areas. So then they get pulled out to get some of that support. It is a state-approved program model. We know through research it is not the best program model. It does not yield the best results. The other ESL the other program model that is state approved is the ESL content based, and you can see right above it, it's 11%. That means every teacher that instructs that child has been ESL certified. So your science teacher, your math teacher, social studies, and that type of thing. And that's actually better, obviously, because those teachers in front of those kids have the skills, the knowledge to be able to provide those linguistic accommodations. We have about 4% of students who are parental denials. We can talk about that later. The very top, you see alternative methods on ESL side, and then on bilingual programs. What that means, it's a code. It's not a program. I need to actually take the program off of there. It's not a program. These are students, 10%, who are being served in an ESL setting without an ESL certified teacher. Same for bilingual. These are students who are in a bilingual program, but the teacher is yet to be bilingually certified. If that makes any sense. And so we'll talk about that as well. Bilingual exceptions and ESL waivers. We'll talk about that later. Moving on to the other side of the pie chart. 15% of our 1.3 million are in a dual language one-way program. 6% are in a dual language two-way program. 7% are in a transitional early exit, and 2% are in a transitional late exit. Again, for all the dual language, both program models for dual language and both program models for transitional, all require the same certification, the same materials and everything. We have found research, not we, not the agency, but research has consistently found that dual language immersion, both one-way and two-way, yields the best results for all students who participate. It is an enrichment program. It is not a remedial program, and it can be implemented with fidelity. We have plenty of resources for that. Moving on. So that was just really a quick kind of like understanding and kind of blurb around who are bilingual or our bilingual program models and sort of the breakdown. Real quick, I do need to mention, and you likely know, that the reason for the more students being in the ESL settings, regardless of the program model, is because bilingual education is only required in Texas until 5th or 6th grade. So at the elementary levels. So again, most kids obviously matriculate up to secondary, and then they end up being in an ESL program, regardless of whether they were in a bilingual program in their elementary or not. Now, you can in secondary offer dual language as a bilingual program if you choose to, and many districts and charters do that. But I'm just kind of wanted to give you that caveat. So, moving on to the LPAC, we do have a uniform process for identifying emergent bilingual students. And this is a state. This is also a state requirement now, because we had in 2020, the most recent legislative session, 2023. Apologies, 2021, we had a call for improving bilingual education. And so we have federal requirements, ESSA, for identification, but we also now have a state call from our legislators to have a strategic plan that also unifies the identification and placement process for emerging bilinguals to a more uniformed process than what our ESSA state plan requires us. Through that, or as a result of our emerging bilingual strategic plan, which is often called Senate Bill 560 from 2021 legislative session, we developed standardized letters for every step of the process, and we also changed the home language survey. I hope that you all know that as educators, being in the field for the last couple of years, we do not have, or we now have a home language survey that has 3 questions. All of our standardized letters, in addition to the home language survey, you see on the right, there's identification and placement, parental denial letters, change of services, and reclassification and exit. All of those are standardized. They should be the same regardless of which campus a student goes to in the state of Texas. They are provided on our website in over 91 languages. There's going to be lots of questions about the HLS for a while, because people, or obviously students were admitted with the previous home language survey that only had 2 questions. Obviously, that when those students enrolled in Texas schools, that was the HLS. And so that is still an appropriate HLS for those students already enrolled. New enrolled students in Texas need to be using the home language survey that has 3 questions on it, and it is on our text portal, our portal, as well as the TEA website. And here's an example of it. We added a 3rd question. If your child was in a previous home setting, what languages were used, and if there was no previous language, you can put not applicable. And we do this because what we've learned about about language acquisition is that students really do, children, right, really do sort of absorb everything around them. And so if they were in a different setting, international adoptions and various things like that, we were able to sort of really capture and properly identify students at the right time. Okay, now your LPAC, your Language Proficiency Assessment Committee. That is required. And so if you are a campus that is, or a district that is, a charter that's implementing a bilingual program, then you will need to have an LPAC administrator, a bilingual teacher, and a parent of an EB student. And then the same for ESL. If it's an ESL program, LPAC administrator, ESL teacher, and then a parent of an emergent bilingual student there. I'm sorry, I didn't realize there were animations. For emergent bilingual students whose parents have denied program services, the LPAC still has to meet and determine, excuse me, and determine needs and services for that student, even, well, it's not program service, but the LPAC still needs to meet and discuss the child and their progress. Here you have a very busy decision chart for a student when they enroll initially in Texas Public Schools. Obviously, the home language survey is the first step. And if there's any of the 3 questions and there is an answer that the language is other than English, that then triggers the student to be tested with the language proficiency assessment test, and then you meet with the LPAC. Or the animations for that. Those are the 3 first steps. Once there's a recommendation for program placement, we need to then identify parents, and that's where the parents will then decide, well, if they're accepting services, right? Many of them do. It is really important that families understand when they are denying services, what that means. And we actually just published a TAA. I want to say it was August. I've been out on FMLA for 8 weeks, but I know that there was a TAA in late August, mid to late August, that discusses parental denials and how to support them, because we actually do have federal guidance now that requires us to, even though the parents have denied services for students, we still, as the education system, need to be able to allow them access to linguistic supports. So if you have not read that TAA, please do go to the Administrator Address website and find the most recent one from the Emerging Bilingual Support Division, and that will explain that. But we do have, again, so the decision tree continues on parental placement. I'm sorry, parental approval for placement. And then we also have reclassification. Students have been in the program, whether it's ESL or bilingual, or parental denials, because parental denials are still required to take TELPAS and all, and still required to reclassify. And so different from previous years, we now have a composite score of advanced high for TELPAS. And so students can reach a composite score. They don't have to have advanced high on all 4 domains, which is going to be helpful, I think, to many students. And they'll be able to reclassify. They also have to have passing star EOC in English. And then there is the teacher subjective evaluation that happens. And again, this is a standard process and procedure for all emerging bilingual students who are eligible to reclassify. Now, I will also note that if you are a campus that is implementing a dual language, whether it's elementary or you continue it on to secondary, if the student in the dual language class is an emergent bilingual and they are now English proficient, it is important that you actually allow them, or you should recommend that they stay in the dual language classroom so that they can continue to grow both their English and their Spanish or partner language. And most of the time that does happen. So, but the student is now then classified and coded as English proficient, but they still can and should maintain participation in that DLI program if they themselves and their parents opt for that. So some of the responsibilities that LPACs have, again, it's for initial identification for any new student or a transfer student. There's assessment decisions that are made, including the language of assessment and designated supports during the middle of the year. I'm just going to make a real quick little plug about language of assessment. It is okay to provide or to allow students to take the Spanish STAR if they so think, if the teacher and student believe that that's the best thing for the student, even if the instruction might be in English. 1 + 1 is 2 in English or in Spanish. So that the students are understanding the content, the output in the assessment is not going to cause them an issue. So I just wanted to just kind of I know there's lots of buzz about language of assessment and sort of encouraging students to take it in English, which is fine if they're able to, but they do have the opportunity through 5th grade to take their assessments in Spanish. We do not have other assessments in other languages for other students. Another LPAC responsibility is to progress monitor linguistic and academic progress for the student throughout the year. And obviously reclassification decisions are very important and made at the end of the school year. Another thing that you guys might want to know and take note of is that this last May, our TELPAS and STAR results, or specifically our TELPAS results, were not released until like, I think it was like the 23rd or 25th of May. That is actually going to be standard practice now, that because of the scoring procedures. And I'm not part of the assessment division, but there is a help desk ticket and questions if you have questions for assessment. But just wanted to let school leaders know that what that means is you're making those decisions at the very, very end of the year, sometimes when school is already out, because schools have different calendars. It is important, though, to really, that's why that bullet right above it about linguistic and academic progress is really important. It's really important to continue to progress monitor those students, so that way the only thing you're waiting on, you have a pretty good decision around reclassification. The only thing you're waiting on is that one data piece, right, to kind of round out the decision. So real important to have those, because you sometimes will lose access to the kids as well, right, during the summer. And finally, LPAC members are required to sign any recommendations. Please know that virtual participation and digital signatures are appropriate. And finally, the LPAC collaborates with the ARD committee. Remember, I mentioned 13% of our 1.3 million students are dually identified, and which means they are served through LPAC and also through special education. And those two committees should collaborate and discuss real clearly the needs of the student from a holistic perspective. One does not trump the other. LPAC does not trump ARD, ARD does not trump LPAC. That's just a common misconception. They should be working together for the holistic service approach for students. Okay, so I talked about demographics, talked about our bilingual programs that include bilingual education as well as ESL programs. And so now we'll talk about what that looks like in terms of implementing these programs. So dual language, you'll see over here on the left, we're talking about bilingual education, which means you have to have a bilingual certified teacher instructing in those classrooms. So bilingual dual language immersion, one way and two way. This is where your students are learning language through content. They're not learning content through language. They're learning content. They just happen to be learning it in two different languages. And so a one way dual language classroom setting is all the students in there are emergent bilingual students. Some of them may have reclassified, but they were originally emergent bilingual students. Many districts and charters and campuses offer a two-way, which is there's emergent bilingual students and non-emergent bilingual students, meaning native English speakers. And they're also learning to read, write, and speak content material in both languages. So this, many people think of the 50-50, and 50-50 actually is about the language allocation. It's not about the actual classroom makeup of kids, but it's always appropriate to have native English speakers and native partner language, whether it's Spanish or Vietnamese or whatnot, so that they can be language peers to one another. But the one-way programs are also absolutely appropriate for the emergent bilingual students in the district. We have transition. And so backing up, if you look on the left, the L1 plus L2, and you see that we're continuing both languages in dual language. If you look at transitional, which is there in the gray in the middle, that's the students L2, which is in cases here, English. And then we are actually subtracting or removing their L1, and not necessarily removing it. We're not fostering the continued proficiency in that language. And so, but research has shown that the stronger you are in your L1, the easier and the stronger you'll be in your L2. So there are phenomenal ways to implement transitional programs, the longer the student is able to have access to at least literacy in their native language. And then at the bottom in green, we have the ESL programs, which is you're here in the United States, and we are giving you instructional strategies to access the content. And again, that's content-based or pull-out. So if it's content-based, meaning the teacher in the classroom is ESL certified and are able to, they have the knowledge and skills to provide those scaffolds and supports to students who are learning a second language. In that ESL certification, the teachers have learned about second language acquisition and content-based language instructional strategies that, again, help students acquire the content that gives them access to the content, though it is all in English. I mentioned CBLI, content-based language instruction. This is an integrated approach to language instruction in which language is developed in the context within the context of content delivery and is culturally and linguistically sustaining. So we have some resources on our portal that speak to second language acquisition, that speak to diversified supports. How do you support students from a content lens who are newcomers, who are dually identified, who are highly mobile? So we lots of different ways to support students. There's technology ideas in that suite of resources as well. And then we talk about culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. And that really is sort of the larger sort of charter approach or campus approach to supporting this group of students. Content-based language instruction, again, is exactly what it says. It's their instructional strategies that are appropriate for all bilingual education programs in any language of instruction. It is tier 1 instruction. It is not remedial instruction. It is, again, instructional strategies that are tier 1, and it is delivered during explicit learning and also during cooperative learning. Again, at the end of the session, I will show you a website that you can download and peruse all of our different resources. Regarding certification requirements for your bilingual education program model, again, as I mentioned earlier, for both dual language program models and both transitional program models, the teacher is required to be bilingual certified. There's some language here on the side about paired teaching. We have lots of dual language programs where, depending on the language allocation plan, the bilingual teacher teaches certain content areas, and there's an ESL teacher that teaches other content areas. So there's a way to do it there. And so, but again, these are very, very local decisions. And obviously, it is not lost on me that we are in a teacher shortage and things like that. We'll talk about that in a second. For certification requirements for ESL is that teachers should be ESL certified if they are providing content, if the campus has decided to have a content-based ESL model or a pull-out ESL model. I know this is a lot of information. Again, I just want to say myself, Dr. Rocha, the entire team are happy to set up a meeting one-on-one and talk with you all as appropriate as you prepare for this Gen 13 application. So as I mentioned earlier, regarding certification and the teacher shortage, all LEAs are required to provide equitable education to emerging bilingual students, whether it is in the bilingual program because they've met the rule of 20, or they're providing ESL instruction, ESL programs. However, we know, and it happens quite often, that teachers are struggling to pass the certification exams, or you just cannot access a teacher that's not part of your pool, right? You're doing all the things you can do in terms of recruitment and retention, and you're not able to get the appropriately certified teachers. We have a process to let the agency know about that. It's called bilingual exceptions and ESL waivers. Your bilingual exception and ESL waivers is literally a notification to the agency on every November 1st that, Longhorn Charter School is implementing a bilingual program, and they're in their elementary, but they don't have a 5th grade. Their 5th grade teacher is not bilingual certified. So then you submit a bilingual exception to the agency, indicating the one teacher, the number of classrooms it impacts, and the number of students. And then what we now have done is we have now created a cyclical process where there is ongoing dialogue with you, the service center, and ourselves, if necessary, to talk about recruitment and retention strategies, how to use the BEA funds, and lots of support to help get the teacher certified, to help support that teacher who, again, is not certified yet, but is teaching in the classroom, and to ensure that that teacher has the instructional supports that that they need for the students in the classroom, but also that the teacher has the support to obtain their certification. When you submit for a bilingual, and the same is true for ESL. So if you have ESL teachers or teachers who are willing and able and wanting to teach ESL in an ESL setting, but they have yet to pass the exam, you then again you file for the bilingual. Sorry, that's an ESL waiver. It's all on the waivers platform, but you then leverage 10% of your total BEA funds. Total BEA funds comes out of the 55% of direct costs, but you're using 10% of your total BEA funds on these two areas of concentration, which is classroom instruction. So the teacher without a certification needs support for the instructional practices. They also then need support to ensure that they get certified. We have program implementation resources. On the far left, we have our dual language, Texas Effective Dual Language Immersion Framework. If you want to implement a dual language program model, whether it's one way or two way, this framework will tell you exactly how to do it and how to support your teachers, your community, how to get buy-in. There's a self-review card, a wealth of resources in that document. I will also say that Texas is the first state in the entire United States to have a framework for dual language implementation. We have received national support around that, or national recognition for that. We have a program implementation rubric for transitional bilingual programs. Again, self-review, you don't submit any of this information to us, but it is really a rubric for school leaders to sort of self-complete, right? And then reflect on areas of improvement. We have the same for the ESL program models. We are in the process of developing an entire framework for English as a second language as well. I mentioned content-based language instruction earlier. Content-based language instruction is part of lever 4 in the Texas EdLIF, and there are components of it as well for lever 3 in the staffing and professional development. These resources are all on our portal, which I will show you here in a minute. Now shifting to program funding, which I've mentioned again, BEA funds, which is bilingual education allotment. I will talk about that's our state funding. We also have Title III Part A funds, which is our federal funding. And this is just a little graphic that sort of shows where sort of the authority is. We have education code and administrative code that then requires bilingual education, Title III, and the requirements for expending those funds. Again, at least 55%, and this is somewhat new. Back in 2019, House Bill 3 increased it from 52% to 55%. 55% of all of the bilingual education allotment funds must be used for providing bilingual education or special language programs, which means ESL, under our Texas Education Code. Your BEA funds can be used for instructional materials and equipment for our EB students, staff development, supplemental staff expenses, salary supplements for teachers, and any incremental costs associated with providing smaller class sizes, as well as supplies offered for quality to increase the quality of instruction. Then you have your federal funds. Federal funds are for emerging bilingual students / English learners. Remember, I told you you'd see it twice if it's federal, or you'd see both terms. And our English learners also include immigrant children and youth. And remember, not all immigrant children are necessarily emergent bilingual. They may come and be fully fluent in English, but they are still coded as an immigrant child. And so the Title III funds, you will generate Title III funds for that student. The requirements for expending these funds are pretty robust. It's to, one, again, help attain English proficiency. To continue to develop the academic achievement in English, achieve high levels of academics to have access to rigorous academic subjects, to sustain effective language instruction, to provide professional development, and then also to promote parent, family, and community engagement. Those are 3 different types of engagements that are, if you haven't yet, please attend our Title III sessions, because Ricky Santillana, our Title III coordinator, does a fabulous job of really explaining the difference and how to really utilize and maximize these Title III funds, specifically for the engagement pieces. Allowable use of funds is always a hot topic. You're supposed to supplement, not supplant. If you are buying everything for general education students, you can't say, oh, well, let's just, pull from our BEA funds to buy this, iPads or whatever for the EB students. Can't do that. You're supplementing, not supplanting, and you're going above and beyond your local funds, right? The comprehensive professional development plan is also very important. You can use this money to really build capacity to find teachers in the district or in the charter, that are interested in serving EB students. Remember, there was a list of requirements for spending the Title III funds and the BEA funds, but definitely building capacity is super important. I mentioned earlier about that parental denial, the federal guidance that we got related to our parental denials. And I think what's going to come out of that is really a need to ensure that all teachers on your campuses are trained or have access to PD around content-based language instruction and second language acquisition, so that when they do have kids in their class who are parental denials, that means their parents said, meaning that the child did score on their language proficiency assessment, that they were still acquiring English, but their parents said, no, they don't want any services. They're going to be in a gen ed classroom, and you really want that teacher in that classroom, because they're not ESL certified or bilingual certified. You still want them to have access to knowledge and skills around second language acquisition and content-based language instruction. So you can definitely use your Title III and BEA funds for that. We do have a funding guidebook that, again, is on our portal, which I'll show you again in a second. Lots of information there. And again, always open and available for any questions you have around the funding as it pertains to emerging bilingual students. In closing, we are here. We support all the ESCs, all the service centers. We provide technical assistance and some PD. We have lots of free PDs and obviously many program resources and guidance. Here is the website I was talking about, txel.org. Please go to that website, subscribe, favorite it, do whatever you want. There are many, many things on there that would be helpful. Our LPAC training modules, full transparency, are somewhat outdated because we have changed our Chapter 89 rule actually twice. Actually, we're in the second changes. So rather than change the modules twice, we're going to wait and change them once. So, but still, we have plenty of the accurate information everywhere else. And the information there in the LPAC modules is just slightly outdated. But there are fact sheets that are updated. There's program implementation resources. Again, that CBLI page. More information about bilingual exceptions and ESL waivers as it pertains to teacher certifications, professional development, bilingual pathways, ESL certification pathways, and lots of resources. I think I'm almost out of time. Here is my email and there's also our inbox there. I would love to get your feedback. If you can get the QR code there. I really thank you for your time and your attention. I hope I gave you some at least tidbits to think about, and welcome your questions as appropriate.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. We really just appreciate all of the great knowledge. It is very fast and furious today. And so applicants, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. If you didn't capture her email directly, that's okay. You can always send it to one of us. But we want to just give a few moments to see if there's any questions in our Q&A for Julie before she heads out. As of right now, I don't see any.
Awesome.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So as a team, if we do get any more that we can't answer, we will send those your way to get some guidance, and then we can follow back up as needed.
Sounds great. Well, I'm here. The team is here, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
All right, team. So there's been a lot of things said, a lot of things thrown your way. I appreciate my team for, just getting through this day. I definitely probably owe them a coffee. But on your screen, you're going to see some upcoming support seminars. It is broken down by topic. It does have the dates and the times. This is also listed out on our website. Sarah did show that during our little mini video on how to access our application documents. So they are all there for you. So please, if that is something that you would like to attend, please capture these dates and or visit our website for more information. So Sarah wanted to put that up, as well as if you can just show our contact information one more time, Sarah, that would be great. Again, that top email goes to myself, Sarah, and John, and then our emails, our individual emails are listed below. Team, do you guys have anything else you would like to add before we close out?
I just wanted to address one question that came into the Q&A that we responded to, but probably best to telegraph to everybody. There was a question about more or less like specialty charters. So if you had a demographic or population you wanted to serve, maybe students with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, I believe are the examples used in the question. There's certainly precedent for charter schools that propose models that will specifically benefit or design for students of that nature that belong to those communities. However, we do remind you that charter schools are open enrollment, and as Brittany had kind of defined earlier, open enrollment meaning you are not going to be able to reject enrollment based on any particular demographic or characteristic. So models can certainly benefit or be targeted towards certain student groups, but at the end of the day, you will still have to enroll should you have space and empty seats, any students that are coming to your door. And as part of our vetting process, we would definitely question any proposal that would provide any sort of specific trajectory like that, but also how will it benefit and educate with fidelity those students who may not be part of that community or share those characteristics. So you are more than welcome to establish those proposals, but again, keeping in the back pocket that you will still have to serve every student, and every student will have to benefit equally from your charter school if you're awarded. So I just wanted to get that to everybody's ears if they missed that in the Q&A chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. All right, team. I think we are all caught up with questions. We have captured some that will be included in our frequently asked questions document. You have gotten lots of information, which will be posted to our website. Please feel free to follow up with us if you do not, or if something didn't get answered today and you're like, I really have something I need to know. Please also bear in mind we are under guidelines and can only answer certain things, very technical things, kind of guide you in that right direction. But again, thank you so much for joining us, and we really appreciate you.
And we did have one quick question I wanted to answer real quick. The question was, when do you think we'll have this posted for you all? Just so you all know that we have to get this approved through accessibility, and so that takes up to a week. So within the next week, you should see all of the PowerPoint presentations from every department presented, linked on the charter applicant page, as well as the recording for this training.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. All right, guys. So we will end it here for the day. Please follow up with us if you have any other questions. Thank you so much.